Chapter 14:12. Sensing the terrifying energy within the two fireballs, the multi-headed hydra lizard's face turned pale with fright. The 5 snake-like and dragon-like heads that were raised high up in the air opened their mouths and spat out energy balls of 5 different colors with all their might. Finally, the 2 fireballs were blown up by the 2 fireballs when they were halfway through the air. The fireballs were first restrained, then all the flames erupted at the same time, forming a huge flaming mushroom cloud at the front of the battlefield. Terrifying energy radiation and shockwaves of shockwaves swept through the surroundings, vaporizing everything within the range of the flames, leaving behind a deep pit with a diameter of 500 meters. The sorcerers and other creatures of disaster that had been locked in a fierce battle at the center of the battlefield fled in all directions with faces full of fear. No one dared to get involved in the direct confrontation between the 2 supreme beings. Flennen? Kanbatu, Mother of Flames. Grim quickly chanted a strange spell and summoned a huge cloud of fire. The cloud of fire engulfed the area where his opponent was like cotton candy. However, in the next moment, a green poisonous aura pierced through the cloud of fire and appeared in front of everyone. The power of poison and the power of fire intertwined and destroyed each other in a frenzy, corroding the plane and filling it with green, terrifying venom. The multi-headed hydra lizard that was shrouded in the cloud of fire came out with earth-shaking steps. It could be seen that a few of the scales on the multi-headed hydra lizard's body had been burnt black, and there were still a few places that still had golden sparks. The poisonous main head of the 5-faced hydra lizard stared at Grim without moving. The other heads turned around and spat out different-colored violent energy, instantly annihilating the remaining inextinguishable flames. However, the part of its body that was destroyed was scorched black and withered, obviously affected by the power of laws. This kind of inextinguishable flames might be useful against enemies who had not grasped the power of laws, but for the 5-faced hydra lizard, as long as he was willing to pay a small price, he could easily extinguish it. One of them was a 1,000-meter-tall man of fire, while the other was a 100-meter-tall serpent lizard. Both of them were extremely large, and the moment they clashed, the earth would shake and the mountains would shake. In addition, both of them had the power of the law protecting them. When the terrifying poison halo and the violent flame halo collided, the law ripples created became even more terrifying killing weapons. The Tier 4 sorcerers and calamity creatures that had fled 1,000 meters away were scared out of their wits when they turned around to look. They immediately lowered their heads and ran for their lives. Although the other superpowerhouses and lesser disaster overlords could also stand in the law ripples, the power they could unleash would still be somewhat affected. Therefore, even they could only furrow their brows and do their best to move the battlefield to a further area. The main battlefield closest to the valley was left to Grim and Penta, who were engaged in a fierce battle. In order to face Grim head-on, the multi-headed serpent lizard swallowed large mouthfuls of void energy. Its body swelled up several times and was now barely able to reach the fire giant's waist. Immediately after, its 5 snakeheads quickly summoned magical energy and condensed a layer of rock armor on the surface of its body. Then, it condensed layers of ice shield on its side. Finally, it cast hurricane shield and wave shield on itself. After all the elemental energy it could use had been used, Penta swayed its fat body and pounced at the fire giant, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. The 2 colossal creatures tangled together. Poison, flames, ice, rocks, hurricanes, huge waves. All sorts of magical energy clashed and destroyed each other, turning the world into a mess. Their powerful mental strength even tore through space, creating a massive mental storm. The multi-headed serpent lizard was indeed a powerful creature known for its strength and physique. Its 5 heads coiled around Grim's body, ignoring the burning flames. They opened their huge mouths and tore at the flames. Grim, on the other hand, had gone berserk. The heat emitted from his body of flame had reached an astonishing level. The skin of the 5-faced body that was entangled with him had been scorched, and the smell of burnt flesh assailed everyone's nostrils. In his body, the light of law released by the Book of Darkness condensed into a thin layer of light, covering the surface of his body. Although this layer of light was as thin as a cicada's wing, it was able to resist the attacks of Penta. However, no matter how strong the protection of law was, it could not withstand the brutal attacks of a ferocious beast. Its 5 sharp teeth bit through the light layer and poured waves of elemental energy into Grimm's body. The elemental energy contained the aura of its soul. To Grimm, who had a pure physique of fire, it was no different from an unparalleled poison. Grimm endured the intense pain in his body. He clenched his mountain-like flaming hand into a fist and smashed it heavily on the serpent heads. Golden flames condensed in his eyes, shooting out rays of golden light that crisscrossed the bodies of his enemies, leaving crisscrossing wounds that went deep into the bones. The violent flame energy condensed by the divine fire bead surged out from his hand and turned into waves of golden flames that wrapped around Penta's body, burning it fiercely. The multi-headed serpent lizard was also in great pain, but it did not give up. It used all its strength to tear off pieces of flame from Grimm's body and threw them to the edge of the battlefield. The flames were Grimm, and Grimm was the flames. Grimm's body was over 1,000 meters long, but he was still at a disadvantage when entangled by the 5-headed serpent. His physique was even better. It was at its lowest point and had not recovered to its peak. Therefore, he was not a match for his opponent at all. Since he could not get rid of his opponent, he would see who was more ruthless. Grimm endured the intense pain and pushed the power of the divine fire bead and Book of Darkness to the extreme, madly burning his opponent's body with flames. Just like that, both sides were locked in a stalemate in the center of the battlefield. They were equally matched. Although they were equally matched, both sides had suffered heavy losses. Grimm's body of flame was clearly not strong enough, and he was torn to pieces by the serpent. It was a tragic sight to behold. As for the multi-headed serpent lizard, it was enduring the most painful and terrifying torment it had experienced in thousands of years. Its body, its serpent heads, its huge legs, were almost cooked by Grimm. Even in the midst of the most intense battle, Penta could smell the burnt smell coming from its body. The skin and flesh on the surface of its body had already been charred, and the slightest touch would cause large chunks of flesh to fall off. Its internal organs, tendons, and bones were also half-cooked. It felt as if thousands of needles were stabbing into it, causing it so much pain that it wished it was dead. Fifth Face was rather doubtful that he would be able to find a single piece of good flesh on his body after this battle was over. Oh heavens! How can there be such a supreme magus in the sorcerer world? Weren't they banished to the outer realm? Nair. Ramsey. Multi-armed. You bastards, come and help me. I'm going to be roasted to a crisp by him. As it fought, Penta raised its serpent head high and let out a shrill hiss. This was the native language of the disaster plane, and only noble, high-ranking creatures like them had the right to master it. Unfortunately, its pitiful cries for help could not move its stone-hearted companions. They turned a deaf ear to the human magi and continued to fight, unwilling to get involved in the great battle between two supreme creatures. Though they boasted of their strength in the sorcerer world before they were tainted by the power of disaster, the maximum strength they could display was only that of a peak rank 4 magus. Using this kind of power to fight a superior sorcerer who had obviously surpassed the limits of the realm. To put it bluntly, only a fellow like Five Face, who was blinded by his own power, would do such a thing. Even the strongest among them, Penta, had ended up in such a pitiful state after fighting the legendary Fire Magus. If they were to go, they would probably be in a worse state. Though invading the sorcerer world was important, it was not so important that they would have to pay with their lives. As a result, the 4 lesser disaster overlords and the human magi fought further and further away. They had already run to the outskirts of the deep Ink Valley, leaving enough space for the 2 on the main battlefield to fight. Though he was in the midst of the most intense battle, Grimm was still rapidly communicating with the AI chip in his mind. Beep. Flame body damaged by 26%, close to serious injury. Flame energy dissipated by 17%. Attack power is decreasing, estimated to fall below 10,000 degrees in 23 seconds. Who estimated target still has 67% of its combat ability and is still a threat to host. Suggested host to use demonic fish transformation and use the astral beast bloodline to devour the opponent. Estimated success rate of devouring is 37%. Also, for every 1% reduction in combat ability, the success rate of devouring will increase by 2%. Demonic fish transformation can't be used. That's a killing move I've left for my predetermined enemies. I can't waste it on this bastard of disaster. Tell me, if we continue like this, will it give up first, or will I? Grimm calmly rejected the AI chip's suggestion. Beep. Based on the current situation, the target is estimated to be able to last for 127 seconds, while the host can only last for 89 seconds. The host's body will collapse first, and the poison will invade it. The AI chip's reply was cruel. Though the laws of fire that Grimm could control were much stronger than his opponent's, he was completely suppressed by his opponent in terms of vitality. Although his opponent was heavily injured, he was able to last longer than him. Then there's no need to hesitate. Activate Scorched Earth. Beep. Command received. Scorched Earth is being activated. Chapter 14:13. It was a strange and mysterious world. The sky was dark red. The land was covered in terrifying volcanoes of varying heights. These volcanoes were unusually active and violent, with thick pillars of black smoke rising from the tall volcanic cones. Due to the continuous influx of black smoke, even the dark red and gloomy sky was covered by thick rolling black clouds. Viscous, scarlet magma flowed all over the exposed lava, forming pools of lava of various sizes in various low-lying areas. In each lava pool, there were groups of flaming creatures frolicking, playing, and swimming in them. At the center of this world, an unusually majestic Mount Doomsday towered high above. The tip of the volcanic cone had even sunk into the rolling black clouds in the sky, revealing most of its majestic body that alternated between black and red. The volcano of Doomsday was still active. The rumbling undercurrent of the volcano was like muffled thunder that became the never-ending background music of this world. At the edge of the volcano were tens of thousands of powerful flame creatures, all of them at the 4th order and above. Many of them had even reached the 5th order. Without exception, they gathered near the small flame altars at the foot of the volcano, meditating and praying day and night. They even formed patrol squads to prevent non-flaming creatures from approaching their sacred mountain. But today, just as they were carrying out their routine prayers, the majestic sacred mountain that pierced the clouds suddenly erupted with a world-shaking roar. Divine Fire Pearl. I smell the Divine Fire Pearl. Who is so bold as to steal my treasure? Violent sound waves surged between heaven and earth, instantly dispersing the dark clouds that covered an area of 5,000 kilometers above the sacred mountain. The majestic body of the Mount Doomsday was revealed to the countless believers for the first time. Wherever the terrifying sound waves passed, the earth would crack and volcanoes would erupt. The entire world would tremble because of it. Not only did the flaming creatures that lived in this kingdom not panic, they instead obediently prostrated themselves, silently praising the great god of fire Renai. In front of the largest flame altar at the foot of the sacred mountain, a 5-meter-tall giant made of fire knelt devoutly and asked with a droning voice, "Master, what has made you so angry? Your most devout servant, Arish, awaits your orders." This giant made of fire was a terrifying being who had reached grade 5. Suddenly roused from her slumber, the god of fire Renai vented the rage in her heart before slowly withdrawing her tyrannical divine force. Only then did the tens of thousands of volcanoes within the fire divine kingdom's territory stop erupting and trembling. They started to calm down. I remember now. My Vulcan bead was stolen by a bunch of despicable magi. Arish, I just sensed the presence of the Vulcan bead. The rank 5 divine spell, Scorched Earth, that I sealed inside has been activated. Immediately send someone to investigate. If they find the whereabouts of the Magus, who stole the fire god's orb or the thief, send the plane's waymark back. Humph, these reckless fellows, I'll send a clone to raze their world to the ground. Yes, my master. Everything will be as you wish. Having received the order, the grade 5 giant made of fire, Arish, turned and left the kingdom of fire, teleporting to another plane that belonged to the god of fire Renai. Here, she presided over the great temple and sent out the god of fire's oracle to dozens of secondary planes. As a result, these huge forces that belonged to the fire god shrine immediately took action and began to search for Grimm and the specific information regarding the fire god bead. What they didn't expect, however, was that this inadvertent effort, which was akin to finding a needle in a haystack, was a huge success. An anonymous wandering lich provided the god of Fire Temple with a valuable lead. Thus, the god of Fire Temple immediately turned their attention to a planar war in the Magus world. It was as if the aura of the divine fire pearl had leaked out from there. Scorched Earth, a grade 5 divine spell. This was a powerful divine spell sealed within the divine fire pearl. It was said that this was the first grade 5 divine spell created by the god of fire Renai after she became a god. As for its power, one could guess a thing or two from the tragic fate of the Hydra serpent. This time, Pentamian was really miserable. Although its body was grade 5, its strength was suppressed to the peak of grade 4 in the Magus world. This also gave the human wizards, who it usually didn't care about, a chance to touch and hurt it. Of course, its strength was limited, but its powerful grade 5 physique was still there. Killing a peak grade 4 human Magus was not a problem. Unfortunately, it was really unlucky. First of all, it encountered Grimm, who was also a very strange existence. His spiritual force had not even reached the peak of grade 4, but he had strangely grasped a powerful law of fire. This was something unimaginable in most of the planes. Moreover, Grimm had 2 grade 5 divine weapons to protect him. Thanks to the Fire God's Pearl and the Book of Darkness, Grimm had been able to tank the Tier 5 Lesser Disaster Lord's berserk attacks and hold his own against it. He had even gained the upper hand. Most importantly, Grimm was able to use the rank 5 divine fire spell, Scorched Earth, sealed in the Vulcan orb. This was the crux of Pentamian's misfortune. Even with Pentaface's strength, the Tier 5 Divine Flame spell had landed on Aqua Rose's body. Despite Aqua Rose's strength, the Tier 5 Flame Divine Flame spell had crumbled instantly. The violent Fire Divine spell surged into the 5-faced face's body, colliding and destroying everything within it without restraint. Its massive body, which had expanded to 400 meters in size, instantly turned bright red. It was as if a doomsday volcano had been shoved into Pentamian's body. Endless flames and magma were about to burst out. The snake scales on the surface of its body shook and swelled like the earth, and terrifying scarlet flames shot out from the gaps between the scales. Through the swollen, almost transparent skin, one could see that what was flowing inside was no longer blood, but thick, boiling, dark red magma. With nowhere to vent the terrifying power of the flames, it rampaged through its body, causing 4 of the 5 snake heads to explode into a bloody paste. The remaining main serpent's head also lost an eyeball, leaving behind a ghastly bloody hole. "Save me! Near. Multi-armed. Save me! I'm going to die." Pentamian, who was tortured to death by the grade 5 divine fire spell, could no longer care about Grimm. It turned around and fled towards Ink Abyss Valley. As it fled, terrifying bloody holes appeared on its body one after another. What came out of the holes was not blood or organs, but hot flames and viscous magma. Even with such a huge body, with such a terrifying rate of loss, It was afraid that it would be burned to ashes by the internal fire before it could escape the sorcerer world. The other 4 lesser disaster lords were similarly shocked. Although they could tell that the mythic fire shaman was difficult to deal with, they never thought that a Tier 5 lesser disaster lord would fail to take care of a Tier 4 human sorcerer. Not only that, but the fire shaman had even forced the Tier 5 lesser disaster lord to flee, vomiting blood. After all, the multi-headed serpent lizard, 5-faced, was already the strongest among them. If even it could not stop the legendary fire shaman, then the rest of them would be in danger. If the lips were gone, the teeth would be cold. For the first time, the lesser calamity overlords felt a great chill from the bottom of their hearts. Could it be that this invasion of the Magus world was a journey to their deaths? Without hesitation, the lesser disaster lords turned around and followed Pentamion into the depths of Ink Abyss Valley. Thus, chase after chase after chase unfolded in every corner of the battlefield. Trying to escape now? It's too late. Grim, who stood tall in the middle of the battlefield, roared. He had paid such a heavy price. If he let the enemy escape, it would be a huge loss. Grim strode forward and grabbed at the air with one hand, gathering large clumps of flame energy from the air. Under his skilled control, the energy transformed into a meter-thick flaming chain that tore through the air and wrapped around Pentamion's fleeing body. Dong. The flaming chain straightened, and Grim's massive flaming body slid forward as the Hydra frantically tried to escape. No matter how hard he tried, he could not stop his body from sliding towards the crack in the valley. Declan, Clara, quick, help me! Grim shouted as he pulled with all his might. I'm coming, I'm coming! At the end of the horizon, Declan and a few wizards from the central continent rushed over like the wind. They all helped Grim to stop the crackling flame chain. With the help of Declan, a rank 4 refinement sorcerer, the Hydra lizard's frantic escape was finally stopped. The crack in the valley was less than 100 meters away, but its massive body was being held back by a group of human magi, unable to move forward. As more and more sorcerers joined in, the 5-face was dragged further and further away from the rift, leaving deep scratches on the ground. Pentamion finally let out an ear-piercing shriek of despair and fear. Bang bang bang. The dense fog dispersed, and the earth trembled. 3 similarly large and malevolent figures landed at the edge of the crack in the valley. They were Pentamion's companions. Seeing them was like seeing his savior, and the venomous head of Pentamion screamed with all its might. Save me, multi-armed. If you save me, I'll give you all the planes under me. Pentamion's cry for help was directed at the multi-armed giant with more than 10 arms. Its body was riddled with wounds, and it had barely escaped the pursuit of the Magi of the Association. Hearing Pentamion's cry for help, the multi-armed giant was stunned. Just as it was considering whether to save Pentamion, Grim had already let go of the flaming chain and rushed towards the crack in the valley with large strides. Multi-arm's expression changed, and it glanced fearfully at Grim's majestic flaming body. Finally, it ignored everything else and plunged into the fog, disappearing without a trace. Bastard! Seeing this, Pentamion fell into despair. Chapter 14:14. 5 Faces was dead. It had to be said that the death of a rank 5 creature brought an incomparable shock to the battlefield. In the world of gods, a rank 5 creature was already at the level of a deity that had transcended the mundane. Killing a rank 5 creature usually meant slaying a god. Of course, if that was the case, 5 Faces could only be called an evil demon at best. But no matter what it was called or how it was judged, it was a rank 5 creature through and through, equivalent to the lowest level of deities. To any plane, it was a high-level life form that had transcended the boundaries of the plane and escaped the control of the laws of the plane. If there were no accidents, the lifespan of a rank 5 creature would start from 10,000 years. Their bodies were immortal, and their souls were incredibly powerful. Under normal circumstances, creatures of the plane would be injured just by looking at the light on their bodies, much less bring harm or death to them. And such an existence had actually died in the sorcerer world, at the hands of a Tier 4 sorcerer. This shock left the wizards at the scene numb, and they were left speechless. Unknowingly, everyone looked at Grimm's 1,000-meter-tall body of flames with a tinge of respect and envy that they themselves could not detect. This was probably the limit of a rank 4 wizard's power. In the distance, beneath the wizard's pagoda, Domnor sighed once again. For some reason, he had sighed more often than he had in the past 100 years. 5 Faces is dead. Pass this news to Sir Onake of the Isorda camp and Sir Li Hua of the Endless Garden. I believe they will be interested in this news. After adjusting his emotions, Domnor immediately contacted someone in the wizard's pagoda through a secret channel. Soon, the message was stealthily transmitted to the Overwatch Tower, and then to several great wizards who maintained close ties with the Sorcerer Association through the interplanar teleportation formation there. On the battlefield, the young wizard only gently floated to the side of the pale Gria and said in a low voice, "I don't plan on provoking this fellow. Our previous agreement is voided. You don't have any objections, right?" Gloria's body shook when she heard this, but she did not refute or reprimand him. Wizard only glanced at her with sympathy, turned around and squeezed out a smile. Then, with a face full of smiles, he slowly flew towards the legendary fire wizard who was standing proudly. It was time to greet the other party and get to know each other. Victory. This battle was definitely an unprecedented victory in the history of the Magus world. He had actually killed a Grade 5 Lesser Lord of Calamity in the realm. This was an unprecedented event in the realm's history. Many participants, especially the 7 middle-rank 4 powerhouses, surrounded the remains of the Hydra lizard excitedly, their faces flushed with excitement. This Tier 5 monster had just been killed not long ago, so its body and soul were still fresh. Under Grimm's command, the Grade 4 players of the Central Continent immediately turned into picky butchers, excitedly harvesting and preserving the remaining enchanted organs. The 5-faced serpent had died a terrible death. Most of its body had been destroyed by the Grade 5 divine spell, and the parts that were not destroyed had been churned into a mess by the raging flames. However, it was still a Tier 5 dire beast. Even a piece of scale, a piece of flesh, or a piece of bone was a high-grade resource that was hard to come by for the wizards present. Flesh. That was fresh meat cut from a Tier 5 dire beast. And they had done it with their own hands, not to mention anything else. Just this glory alone would make them feel exceptionally proud when they thought about it 100 years later. Scale removal, skin removal, flesh gouging, bone removal, tendon extraction, blood collection, marrow collection, brain extraction. Many of the Central Continent's Grade 4 players were not willing to let others do the dirty work, so they crowded around the carcass and busied themselves. Wizards from other organizations could only watch from afar with envy, not daring to approach the slaughterhouse at all. Declan, the only physique refinery wizard in the Central Continent, rolled up his sleeves and trousers like a bloodthirsty butcher. He grabbed a Grade 4 broadsword that someone had contributed, sweating profusely as he quickly cut up the spoils of war. The reason he was sweating profusely was not because he was tired, but because he was excited. He held the scales of a Tier 5 dire beast in his hands, stepped on the flesh of a Tier 5 dire beast, and hacked at the bones and tendons of the Tier 5 dire beast. His face was drenched in the blood of the Tier 5 dire beast. Yet Declan was doing such dirty work with gusto, as if he did not need anyone's help to finish off this huge dire beast. Clara, Alfred, Matthew, Nicholas, and the rest gathered around him, taking out magic sealing boxes and chests from their storage rings. They carefully dug out the enchanted organs from the bloodstains, casting spells to preserve them before sealing them one by one. The biggest contributor to this battle, the legendary fire wizard Grimm, stood silently near the crevice in Moyuan Valley, slowly retracting the overflowing flame energy and returning to his human form. It was a ghastly sight, full of holes. Grimm's exposed body was densely covered in all kinds of scars and injuries, especially the places where the Hydra lizard had ruthlessly torn apart. Large patches of flesh and blood were a ghastly sight to behold. Even the parts of his body that were still in good condition were covered in strange green, black, or purple spots. They were the elemental toxins left in Grimm's body after the Hydra lizard had bitten him. If he did not find a way to get rid of them, Grimm would not be able to recover from the damage. Killing 1,000 enemies, but losing 800. After all, Grimm was not a physique refinery wizard that excelled in close combat, so he was at a great disadvantage in close combat. This caused his body to be severely damaged, and he was on the verge of being heavily injured. But fortunately, he had won. This gave him enough time and energy to slowly heal the wounds on his body. He assigned the task of gathering resources and materials to his subordinates, and slowly closed his eyes to begin the healing process. This was also his intention, to let the Grade 4 wizards of the Central Continent have a greater sense of participation and strengthen their cohesion. From their joyful and enthusiastic attitude, it could be seen that their acceptance of Grimm could not be compared to the past. The feeling of pride and excitement for the central region had gradually sprouted and grew in their hearts. While Grimm closed his eyes to heal himself, he suddenly sensed something and opened his eyes to look at an unfamiliar figure that was slowly approaching him. The figure was less than 2 meters tall, about the size of a finger in front of Grimm. However, the powerful energy contained in his body was something that even Grimm would have to be careful of at his peak. This was a young wizard with a passable appearance, but his aquiline nose, thin lips, and 2 heavy dark blue eye bags perfectly destroyed his image, giving off a bad impression that he was a man who had been drinking too much and was putting on a strong front, but was inwardly weak inside. However, Grimm did not judge people by their appearance, but by the luster of energy in their bodies. Even if a normal wizard had a protective force field around them, it could not stop Grimm from probing through the laws of the world. However, this young wizard in front of him was like a black hole of energy. Grimm could not even detect the attribute of the energy in his body. This was not the first time he felt this way. Grimm had felt the same way when he saw Grimm using a Grade 5 magic tool. The other party stopped 500 meters away and did not try to get closer to Grimm. Although they were both human sorcerers, there was no mutual trust or friendship between them. If he continued to move forward, he would break through the safe distance and trigger Grimm's instinctive reaction. 500 meters. This distance was just right. Even if the other party showed hostility, they would have enough time to react. Therefore, no powerful wizard would allow another powerful being to get too close to them. If someone really did not know what was good for them and violated this safe distance, at that time, in order to protect themselves, they would have to fight each other. Of course, Angor and Grimm belonged to the Wizard Association. Although they did not get along, they still trusted each other. "You're Angor. I've heard of you." Grimm examined the other party and spoke first. "I think you're the strongest wizard in the Magus Association. You should remove the seams." This Magus Angor said arrogantly, but soon after, he smiled mischievously. "However, in front of a legendary fire Magus like you, we have no right to be arrogant. A Grade 5 creature. I really didn't expect that even a terrifying Grade 5 creature would die in your hands. How terrifying! Did you come here just to lament about this?" Grimm said with a smile that did not seem like a smile. "Of course not. I just wanted to discuss something with you. I see that your injuries are quite serious. Why don't you let the healers of our association treat you? This way, your combat strength will also recover a little faster." When it came to serious matters, Unli couldn't help but say with a serious expression, "Also, these are your spoils of war. Keep them well." With these words, Angor raised his hand and threw out 4 fist-sized crystals of different colors, slowly floating towards Grimm. Grimm scanned the area, and the AI chip's prompt sounded in his mind. Detected 4 high-energy elemental crystals at the pinnacle of Grade 4. Their attributes are Hurricane, Ice, Rock, and Flame. According to the analysis, they should be the energy crystals condensed from the heads of the Hydra lizard that exploded. He did not expect Angor to not hide anything, and was even willing to spit out these energy crystals that had reached the peak of Grade 4. The coldness on Grimm's face melted a little. Just as he was about to converse with this tactful Magus Angor, the group of Central Continent Magi suddenly let out excited shrieks that sounded like the wails of ghosts and the howls of wolves. Soon after, Declan crawled out of the 5 corpses, covered in blood. His hands were holding a huge dark green crystal in front of him. Rank 5. Rank 5. Declan's high-pitched and somewhat ear-piercing voice was already distorted, but in the ears of those who heard it, it was like a clap of thunder that shook their souls. Chapter 14-15. Everyone's attention was instantly attracted by the dark green crystal that Declan held high in his hands. Even though it was a few hundred meters away, the strange ripples of laws on the dark green crystal left a deep impression on everyone. Even Wizard Onley, who was unmoved by the 4 elemental crystals, changed his expression the moment he sensed the ripples of laws. He suddenly turned his head, and his dark eyes revealed a scorching and greedy gaze as he stared at the crystal. A crystal of laws. This was definitely a crystal of laws. A terrifying beast was roaring in Wizard Onley's heart. He almost couldn't wait to reach out and hug the crystal in his arms. He wanted to taste the law inside. Although poison was incompatible with his original element, this was a crystal of laws. No one would complain about having too many. Just as he was about to lose control of his emotions, the legendary fire wizard Grimm waved his hand, and a ball of golden flames wrapped around the dark green crystal and flew into his hand. At the same time, a similar dark green figure crawled out of Grimm's body and jumped on Grimm's shoulder like a naughty child who didn't get any candy. "Give it to me, master. I want that thing. I want it, I want it, I want it." It was the plague spirit, Remy, who hadn't shown himself for a long time. Ever since the secret voodoo scroll had swallowed the Book of Wisdom, it had jumped from rank 4 to rank 5. However, Remy's soul force was too weak to control such a powerful body, so he could only fall into a deep sleep for a long period of time. Now that he suddenly sensed this poison crystal that was completely compatible with his original element, Remy was naturally overjoyed. He couldn't wait to devour it to strengthen his soul and the law of poison. Of course, Grimm wouldn't refuse his request. Remy was the spirit of his soul armament, after all. If Remy could become stronger, it would be easier for him to control the Book of Darkness in the future. He wouldn't need to sleep for a long period of time every time he tried to use it, just to accumulate enough soul force for the next use. Therefore, after obtaining the poison crystal of law, Grimm didn't hesitate to feed it to Remy's mouth. Remy, who was originally only 1 meter tall, suddenly opened his mouth to the widest and swallowed it in one gulp. He then rubbed his protruding belly in satisfaction and turned around to enter Grimm's body again. Seeing this scene, Wizard Onley, who was still thinking about how to make a deal with Grimm, had a stunned expression on his face. After a long while, his expression turned into one of disappointment and despair. He didn't even have the mood to strike up a conversation. Grimm might not know how rare a crystal of laws was, but Onley, who was active in the foreign lands, knew. For example, the traditional sorcerer system divided the sorcerer's power into 9 levels from rank 1 to rank 9, and each level corresponded to a corresponding power standard. Other than that, there was another system that divided wizards based on the source of their power. Grade 1 to Grade 3 sorcerers mainly used elemental energy. Whether it was to strengthen the body or the soul, the source of the sorcery power they could use was always the elemental particles. These wizards were called elemental wizards. Once they reached rank 4, they would become the strongest force in the plane world, and they would have the qualifications to come into contact with the laws of the plane. At this stage, wizards would have to work hard to convert their elemental force into the corresponding law, and then condense and improve the source of their power. Their familiarity with the plane's laws would become the benchmark to measure their basic strength. Such a magus could be called a law magus. On the other hand, Tier 5 and Tier 6 sorcerers mainly relied on the power of laws. They needed to condense the power of laws into their own power of laws. Only by completely mastering a certain power of laws could a rank 4 wizard become a god, surpassing the natural mode of the plane and becoming a great wizard who transcended life and death. Rank 5 and Rank 6 Grand Magi were also known as Magi of Laws. As for those above Rank 6, Only had only heard of them from others. Rank 7 and 8 Great Wizards no longer controlled the power of laws, but the power of a higher world. He didn't know what kind of power it was or where it came from. As for the peak of wizards, those Rank 9 Great Wizards, they controlled a strange thing called Origin Force. Amway's understanding of origin power had become even more vague and incomprehensible. If he wasn't a core member of the Magus Association, he probably wouldn't even know this information. After all, this was the most top-level and confidential information in the Magus Association. Only had been stuck at the peak of Rank 4 for 300 years, but he still couldn't upgrade his law force to the power of laws. This was also the only reason why he had left the sorcerer world and wandered the outer realms. Gloria and the other super powerhouses of the association were the same, facing the huge problem of converting laws into laws. Thus, when Only saw a crystal of laws appear in front of him, the huge shock in his heart was so great that even his little heart couldn't bear it. Laws. Laws. Why were laws so difficult to comprehend? One of the main reasons was that the power of laws was illusory and untraceable. It was just a magical and grand force that was produced when the plane world operated according to a predetermined system of laws. One could only slowly experience and comprehend the existence of the higher laws through the end of the law that they controlled. This was like asking a doctor who had never dissected a human body to guess the source of blood, the shape of the heart, and the mechanism of its operation. The difficulty of this task could be imagined. Thus, it had to be said that those who could cross the threshold of the plane to become a Rank 5 wizard were all extremely lucky, and their knowledge of wizard theory was extremely profound. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to achieve such shocking result. Seeing Grimm feed a precious crystal of laws to some kind of pet, Only's heart almost broke. He reluctantly exchanged a few more words with Grimm, then hurriedly ran away from Grimm's side. While the big shots were harvesting the spoils of war and enjoying the rare after-effects of the battle, a large number of wizards from the association and groups of wizard troops swarmed out of the wizard's pagoda and began to carefully clean up the entire battlefield. Grimm quietly stood at the edge of the large crack in the Ink Abyss Valley. With him around, the disaster creatures and mutant beasts were suppressed within the crack, not daring to show themselves. This gave the Wizard Association a rare opportunity to take back the battlefield. All the surviving mutant beasts were slaughtered one by one, then cut into necessary wizard ingredients. With such a large number of high-quality ingredients, the wizards of the association could create more powerful wizard beasts. The war wizard pagodas that had been destroyed were also cleaned up, and new war wizard pagodas were quickly rebuilt from scratch on top of the original ruins. There was also a large number of wizards from the association riding giant owls or double-headed eagles above the crack, sprinkling some strange green plants down. These green plants grew at a speed visible to the naked eye as soon as they landed on the ground. Their roots and tentacles were like enchanted daggers, piercing into the rock walls that were as hard as steel. The green branches and leaves that spread out shook happily in the mist, swallowing the evil and filthy aura of disaster in the air. With their help, the fog in the valley gradually thinned and thinned. Other than the inside of the valley, which was still shrouded in mist, the outside of the valley had already returned to its original appearance. As the aura of disaster was purified, the sorcerer world's plane law chain also grew and spread at a crazy rate. The aura of the plane law here was also getting thicker. The plane's consciousness transmitted joy and joy to every living being that was busy in the Ink Abyss Valley through the laws. Of course, for the low-level wizards, they just felt more motivated the more they worked, and the busier they were, the more relaxed they felt. They could not understand the existence and source of this mysterious power. As for the Tier 4 sorcerers, they closed their eyes and focused, silently sensing the traces of planar feedback surging into their bodies. This was a rare opportunity for them to have direct contact with the plane's consciousness. Under the nourishment of the threads of plane feedback, the previously blurry plane law would inexplicably light up, becoming clear and intuitive. The power of the rule that he couldn't touch in the past would also vaguely reveal itself like a mirage. This was why the high-grade wizards would flock like ducks every time they fought against a plane invasion. The plane feedback and the plane's consciousness's blessing after a victory was a rare opportunity to comprehend laws. If not for this large-scale planar war that could trigger a sense of crisis from the plane's consciousness, they would not have received such a degree of blessing. From this point of view, the 7 level 4 wizards that followed Grimm from the central continent to Ink Abyss Valley had also benefited from their efforts. They had put in so much effort and risked their lives to fight against the creatures of disaster, and this was the only thing they could get in return. Although the level 4 wizards that stayed in the central continent were safe now, they obviously did not have such a rare opportunity. This was why danger, opportunity, and danger would always coexist. The Sorcerer Association would naturally not be stingy with Grimm, who had contributed greatly to this war. More than 10 level 2 and level 3 healers flew around Grimm, using milky white divine energy to remove the accumulated elemental toxins in his body. Even more healers shot out rays of green light in front of Grimm's huge body and applied healing potions that stimulated the recovery of the flesh, doing their best to repair all the injuries. With Grimm's huge body and terrifying elemental resistance, any of his wounds would probably require several kilograms of high-grade healing potions to have a slight effect. The fact that the Sorcerer Association was willing to spare no expense to save Grimm showed their sincerity in trying to establish a good relationship with him. Chapter 14-16. At the edge of the battlefield, the Northern Witches and the Silver Alliance were resting and recovering in silence. After hastily absorbing the feedback of the plane and comprehending the manifestation of laws, the Northern Witches gathered around the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, and discussed in low voices. What is the Sorcerer Association trying to do? Are they trying to mend their relationship with Grimm? Circe said. Due to the previous conflict, Circe had always hated the legendary fire sorcerer incomprehensible to outsiders. Unfortunately, even though she had thought of all kinds of ways to suppress him, he still rose steadily step by step. Now, even she, the leader of the Dark Witches, had to be careful in front of him, afraid that he would have something on her. When she thought of how badly she had suffered at his hands, Circe could not help but feel resentful. However, as soon as Circe spoke, Thuna's cold gaze fell on her. Circe, I don't care what conflict you had with Grimm before. From this moment onwards, it has been written off. You must maintain basic etiquette and respect at all times. Otherwise, even I can't protect you if he starts to provoke you. Do you understand? Yes. Circe immediately agreed obediently. Although both of them were leaders of the witches and had equal status, Thuna had been famous for a long time and had the strength of a super-powerful being. Hence, among the leaders of the witches, she and the leader of the Pale Witches, Sylvia, were the big sisters of all the witches. They were respected by all the other witches. Thuna sighed inwardly. She could see that Circe was still not convinced on the surface. Ever since these high-grade witches had advanced to grade 4, they had become human beings and lived a noble life. They had never experienced the dark strife and bloody and cruel internal struggles between the sorcerers. They were still too young and arrogant. They did not know how serious the consequences of offending a powerful sorcerer who was growing rapidly would be. The Sorcerer Association was so powerful and had such a solid foundation. When it was time to submit, they would not fall out with a future great sorcerer. Circe, on the other hand, had rashly intervened in the battle of the Destiny Witches for the sake of her family's personal interests, and now she was sinking deeper and deeper. Circe herself might not have sensed the impending crisis, but Thuna already had a premonition that the entire Dark Witches would fall into a trough because of her recklessness and impulsiveness. The Northern Witches had fallen from the original 13 branches to the current 8 branches, and their strength was not as good as before. Among them, the Austere Witch and the Destiny Witch's inheritance had been severed for nearly 1,000 years due to special reasons, and it was only in the past few hundred years that their inheritance was rediscovered. If anything were to happen to the Dark Witches, the situation in the northern region would become even more turbulent. Although Circe's words were a bit rash, her speech obviously resonated with the Northern Witches. Angelina, the leader of the Deceit Witches, could not help but ask, "Sister Thuna, aren't you surprised by the Sorcerer Association's actions? Previously they had fought with Grimm, but now they were like a family again. What are they doing?" Thuna looked around and saw the confusion on the faces of her sisters. She could only shake her head and sigh. This is an overt plot by the Sorcerer Association. An overt plot? The witches were puzzled. I'm afraid everyone can see that no one can suppress the legendary fire warlock Grimm now. As long as he exists, the central continent will be his. None of the 3 of us will be able to touch it. Doesn't that mean the 3 of us should work together to suppress Grimm? What does that have to do with them trying to curry favor with us? You still look down on high-grade wizard. You don't know how terrifying a powerhouse who's out of control can be. Thuna looked around and said coldly, "Let me tell you this. With Grimm's current strength, if he abandons his base and fights guerrilla warfare, he can easily destroy any wizard faction." Hiss! All the witches sucked in a breath of cold air. Although they had experienced the power of a legendary fire warlock through the battle just now, they still did not expect Thuna to think so highly of him. If that was the case, did that mean that Grimm did not have any enemies in the wizard world? Among the 3 major factions, the Silver Alliance has the City in the Sky, and the Wizard Association has the Overlook Tower. With these 2 fortresses, no matter how unsolvable the situation is, as long as they retreat, they will have a chance to stabilize themselves. But our northern lands do not have such top-level wizard facilities. Once we fall out with Grimm, all of the northern witches will face the possibility of collapse. At this point, Thuna paused and looked coldly at Circe. "I know that you Dark Witches have gained a lot from developing the Shadow Dimension over the years, and have also nurtured a large number of dark armies. However, if you continue to provoke that Grimm, he will smash your dark secret realm into pieces. What can you do to him then? Are you going to lead the Dark Army to chase after him? It's not like you haven't seen the power of a powerful fighter. That fire wizard can kill hundreds of thousands of mutated beasts and creatures of disaster alone, forcing them back to the Black Ink Valley. Circe, do you think your Dark Army will be enough to burn him with the Burning Domain?" Circe finally lowered her pretty face this time. Her body hidden in the black fog could not help but tremble a little. Thuna did not want to crush Circe's fighting spirit too much, and quickly revealed the answer to her question. "It's a good thing that the Wizard Association is trying to rope in Grimm. It means that they have understood that a direct attack will not be effective, and will only force him to the opposite side of us. So, they used an overt scheme to send Grimm out of the wizard world. If we do not find a way to speed up this process, with Grimm's strength and age, he will have no problem ruling the central region for close to 1,000 years before he advances. 1,000 years is too long for us 3 major wizard organizations, so the association will definitely do its best to satisfy Grimm's needs. All we want is for him to advance to level 5 as soon as possible and be banished from the wizard world by the laws of the dimension. A central region without Grimm. That vampire Mary will not be able to support it. The witches came to a sudden realization, and could not help but nod in unison. Indeed, in a situation where they could not continue to suppress Grimm, it was undoubtedly a wise plan to try their best to shorten the time he had to rule the central region. Even if Grimm had sensed it, he would not be able to give up the desire and impulse to advance to a great wizard as soon as possible. However, the once famous 3 major wizard organizations had now fallen to the point where they had to use such a method to deal with a magus of the central region. Thinking about it, they felt a little sad and helpless. The battle was not truly over. Although all the creatures of disaster had been chased back to the deep Ink Valley, they were still entrenched in the underground crack, tightly guarding the huge spatial crack. If they dragged on for too long and allowed them to erode the foundation of the plane, once the spatial barrier was broken, the rank 6 Lord of Disaster would be able to enter the wizard world, and all their previous efforts would be for naught. Only within the planar plane, under the suppression of the planar law, could Tier 4 warlocks kill Tier 5 Lesser Disaster Lord. Once they lost the advantage of the spatial barrier, they would not be able to withstand a single slap from the rank 6 Lord of Disaster. That was why they could not afford to lose the spatial barrier, no matter how great the sacrifice was. Hence, after cleaning up the battlefield and purifying the aura of disaster around the valley, a large number of wizard beasts rushed into the crack under the guidance of the Magi. There, the wizard beasts and mutated beasts switched positions. This time, the wizard beasts were the main attackers, while the mutated beasts defended with their lives, treating the entire crack as a battlefield. In order to prevent the wizard beasts from being infected and betraying them, the main attackers this time were a group of steel puppets, magic armored warriors, and animated runes. At the forefront were the magic armored warriors. They were all more than 3 meters tall, and their bodies were in the shape of armored warriors. Their insides were hollow, and they were supported by pure magical energy. With a shield in one hand and a sword in the other, they marched forward with heavy steps. 5 in a row, 5 in a row, they marched forward in a neat formation. As soon as they entered the mist, the group of mutated beasts that had been huddled together rushed over. The mutated beasts of flesh and blood immediately collided with the group of iron-armed magic armor warriors. These magic armored warriors were not as clumsy and sluggish as the common iron golems. Their movements were very agile and accurate, and they were not afraid of death. Facing the pouncing mutated beasts, the magic armored warriors stepped forward and slammed the giant shield in their left hand, knocking the opponent unconscious before raising their swords to slash. The magic armored warriors had no life at all, so there was no fear or retreat. They were a group of thick metal armors, giant shields, and heavy swords animated by magical energy. Therefore, there was no other way to deal with them. They could only use force to knock away the shields and swords, and smash their magic armors to make them completely lose their combat power. The characteristics of these spells determined their battle style. That was to charge and kill, facing the raging swarm of mutated beasts. The magic armored warriors raised their swords and swung their giant shields to protect themselves. Step by step, they killed their way into the underground space. The mutated beasts, on the other hand, made full use of their agile and treacherous bodies to attack from the front, from the side, from climbing the rock walls, or from above. Chapter 14:17. There was no such thing as mercy or forgiveness in the planar wars. One side was a blatant invader, while the other was a defender of their homeland. There was no possibility of reconciliation or coexistence between the two. Either the invaders defeated the native defenders and became the new ruling class of the world, or the native defenders annihilated all the invaders and successfully preserved their ruling position. There was no other way. Hence, in the face of the menacing creatures of disaster, the Magus Association was forced to use their trump card, a large number of enchanted runes and metal puppets. Of course, in this aspect, the Magus Association could not be compared to the Silver Alliance. The main reason why the Silver Alliance chose to establish their base in the west of the continent was that most of the rare mineral resources of the Magus continent were concentrated there. They excavated, tempered, and modified the resources nearby, creating a nation of puppets that would amaze the world. Other Magus organizations had to tremble with fear and tread carefully in the face of the onslaught of the demon wave. A moment of carelessness would allow the tide-like beast horde to flood into the human country they were protecting, weakening the foundation and future of their organization. Only the Silver Alliance was unbelievably valiant, pulling out an entire army of puppets to fight head-on against the kings of the forest that had gathered. They forcibly blocked the mountainous sea of beasts at the edge of the Black Forest, not allowing them to advance an inch. If not for the fact that the puppet army could not fight far from the energy pools, the Silver Alliance might have dared to lead the puppet army into the Black Forest and wipe out the kings of the monsters, utterly defeating them. As for the invasion within the Silver Alliance's territory, it was suppressed by the powerful puppet army, and could only cause some small waves in the local areas. Once the puppet army pressed on, the foreign invaders would not be able to resist the tide of the Golem army and the animated Rune army. The strength of the Silver Alliance was evident from this. However, the success of the Golem army was due to the Golems, and the downfall was due to them. The army of Golems was indeed unstoppable and unstoppable, but they were too big, too heavy, and their movements were also extremely slow. As the defensive force within the territory, with sufficient energy and vehicles, the Golem army could unleash a terrifying might that could destroy mountains. But once they left the territory ruled by the Silver Alliance, without the astonishing number of airships as their vehicles and the densely packed energy pools to replenish their energy, the powerful battle prowess of the Magic Colossus army would be greatly reduced. As the Sorcerer World's #1 sorcerer organization, the Sorcerer Association's overall strength could crush the other two sorcerer organizations. However, they were still far inferior to the Silver Alliance in terms of construct golems. Without such superb golem building skills and abundant rare mineral resources, the Wizard Association did not have the ability to build their own golem army, so they could only use a simplified version of the Magic Armor Warrior. Although it was called a Magic Armor Warrior, there was no flesh or blood inside it. It was a hollow steel armor that had been enchanted and could perform various battle movements according to the will of the wizard. This kind of Magic Armor Warrior was loyal and valiant, and it was exceptionally worry-free to use. The only weakness was that their defense wasn't strong enough. The golems created by the Silver Alliance were all abnormally heavy and solid metal puppets. Even their metal arms were a meter thick. Even if they didn't use any weapons, smashing their fists on any living creature would be no different from being hit by a battering ram. On the other hand, the Magic Armor Warriors of the Wizard Association were hollow inside. Although this saved a large amount of metal materials, it also caused their defense to plummet. Under normal circumstances, the Wizard Association would send out a large number of organized wizard beasts during a dimensional war, and these Magic Armor Warriors were completely used as guards of the Wizard's pagoda. But now, the wizard beasts were easily tempted by the powerful Lord of Disaster who had a strange ability to infect others. Thus, the Association could only let the wizard beasts retreat to the second line, and let the assembled Magic Armor Warriors become the vanguard to attack the Dark Ink Valley. After suffering a head-on attack from the wizards, the mutated beasts that had passed through the space fissure were restrained by the disaster creatures, no longer surging out of the earth fissure. Instead, they entrenched themselves in the depths of the fog, silently waiting for the moment the space law chain around the space fissure would break. After all, the Sorcerer World was a large dimension with a shocking number of powerful wizards. When they gathered together, even the disaster creatures that had wreaked havoc in so many dimensions would find it difficult to defend against them. After all, they were invaders here, and would always be suppressed by the laws of the dimension. It was difficult for them to display their full strength. Otherwise, the ridiculous scene of a level 5 lesser lord of disaster being killed on the spot by a level 4 wizard would not have happened. Low-level disaster creatures might not be afraid of death, but high-level disaster creatures had intelligence and consciousness that was no weaker than any other intelligent race. They were delicate and precious, and would naturally want to take advantage of the benefits. But once they found out that there was a powerful existence hidden in the target dimension that could threaten and kill them, they would immediately cower. These lesser lords of disaster were like a group of greedy bears, drooling over the honeycomb honey in the tree hole. If there were only bees inside, even if it meant being stung a few times, they would still stick their heads in and feast on the honey. But if there was a poisonous snake hidden in the honeycomb that could threaten their lives, then it was not worth it to lose their lives for a few mouthfuls of food. The 4 lesser disaster overlords who had returned to hide in the canyon were now in a dilemma. There were a large number of powerful magi gathered above, and they took turns to attack. Even a lesser lord of calamity like them would find it hard to endure. Retreat. Outside the spatial crack, the leader of the lesser lords of disaster, the level 6 lord of disaster, Dilmas, was guarding there. If they returned without success, with Dilmas's temper, he would definitely choose an unlucky one and swallow him alive to punish them for their cowardice and failure. In such a dilemma, the 4 lesser lords of disaster could only desperately summon a large number of mutated beasts from the other dimensions they ruled, hoping to rely on them to defend the canyon and wait for the moment when the chains of laws of the dimension would loosen. As for charging out and fighting with the wizards, as long as the legendary fire wizard was still guarding the exit of the canyon, they would be digging their own graves. The legendary fire wizard's body was too large, and it was almost impossible for him to squeeze into the canyon. This way, without him holding the line, the other powerful wizards would have to face the combined attacks of the 4 lesser lords of disaster. If this stalemate continued, they would continuously corrode and pollute the spatial crack below, and they might really be able to delay the time until the spatial crack could accommodate level 5 power. Once that moment came, the 4 lesser calamity lords that could fully display their powers would definitely sweep through the entire sorcerer world like breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The so-called wizards could only hide in the wizard's pagoda, trembling in fear and struggling at death's door. When that time came, the major wizard organizations would probably only be able to escape. As for their territories and resource points, they would all be thrown to the creatures of disaster. If that really happened, even if they had to sell everything they had, the major wizard organizations would have to use their last resort, pleading with the great wizards who had left the wizard world to come back from the depths of the Milky Way. After leaving the wizard world, and cutting off most of the connections with the sorcerer plane, it was unknown if the great wizards would still be willing to risk their lives to come back. Even if the great wizards were willing to come back, within the wizard world, the power of both sides was suppressed to the same level. Even if the great wizards could repel the attack of the lords of disaster, it was still a huge unknown. It was precisely because both sides had a reason not to retreat that an unusually bloody battle broke out. The first team of 1,000 magic-armored warriors entered the Black Ink Valley, and they were completely wiped out in just half a day. At the bottom of the Black Ink Valley, tens of thousands of beasts were moving about. Beasts squeezed against beasts, beasts against beasts. It had practically become a monster forest of mutated beasts. The magic armor warriors only advanced 500 meters before they were blocked on the slope by the swarm of mutated beasts. Both sides started a life-and-death battle, and the final result was that the mutated beasts killed this team of 1,000 magic-armored warriors with 50,000 casualties. The moment the first troop of magical armor was annihilated, the second troop of 1,000 magical armor trod on the ground full of blood and mud, pushing away the wreckage of magical armor and the broken bodies of mutated beasts that were blocking their way, and rushed into the slope of death step by step. This time, they were followed by a team of nearly 100 wizards, all of whom were elemental wizards. When the second team of 1,000 magic-armored warriors clashed with the group of mutated beasts again, violent and terrifying elemental waves appeared behind them. Then, like a storm, elemental spells began to wreak havoc on the entire front of the battlefield. Violent lightning storms that seemed like they could destroy the world, sharp earth spears that shot up from the ground, whirlpools that contained countless wind blades, ice blades and snow swords that fell from the sky, and large areas of pale green poisonous clouds. The wizards' attacks did not deliberately avoid the magic-armored warriors. Instead, they tried their best to throw the spells at the most concentrated area of the group of mutated beasts. Under the sweep of the berserk sorcery, not to mention those mutated beasts with bodies of flesh and blood, even the magic armor warriors with steel bodies and magic resistance runes inscribed on their shells could not withstand such a degree of sorcery attack. Batches of mutated beasts fell and died at the front of the battlefield. Their corpses were completely torn and shredded by the violent witchcraft, turning into lumps of unidentifiable body parts or bloodstains on the ground. The slope of the rift valley that had sucked in the blood of the mutated beasts quickly became unusually sticky and slippery after being stepped on by a pair of heavy and solid iron feet. But all this obviously didn't stop the cannon fodder from the two different planes from continuing to fight bravely without fear of death. Thus, the next batch of mutated beasts continued to rush out and collided with the magic-armored warriors who were trampling on the corpses and blood. Then, violent witchcraft descended from the sky, once again turning the battlefield into a bloody and cruel slaughterhouse. Chapter 14:18. Naturally, the creatures of disaster would not allow the wizards to advance to the bottom of the rift so easily. If that happened, they would lose the protection of the horde of mutated beasts, and could only fight with the wizards who had the advantage of the territory. Therefore, the horde of mutated beasts came out of the rift in an even more frenzied manner, surging towards the wizard army like a tide. On the ground, the densely packed mutated beasts used their flesh and blood to block the advance of the magic armor warriors. On the rock walls on both sides, mutated beasts ran and climbed as if they were flying, pouncing towards the wizards at the back of the team. At this moment, the wizards standing in the front row immediately sprinkled a dazzling fluorescent light, summoning huge activated runes and war puppets that were more than 10 meters tall. Compared to the magic armor warriors, these war puppets had solid metal bodies. They were humanoid, beast-shaped, or even magical creatures. No matter which one it was, they all had terrifying killing techniques and method. They were like an iron wall, blocking the swarming mutated beasts from all directions. Waving the dense sword formation around them, they killed their way into the horde of mutated beasts like a tornado. One by one, the mutated beasts jumped down from the rock walls and pounced on the tall bodies of the war puppets. Their huge fangs and sharp claws scratched the surface of the metal shells, producing ear-piercing sounds, but only leaving shallow and fine white marks. These war puppets were full of half-meter-long, abnormally sharp metal blades. They did not need to fight, they only needed to roll through the horde of mutated beasts, leaving behind a ground full of minced corpses. After all, flesh and blood could not compare to steel. However, when there were enough ants, they could kill an elephant. As more and more mutated beasts pounced on them, the enchanted metal blades on the war puppets' bodies cut through their flesh and bones again and again, gradually becoming damaged and sluggish. Finally, these metal blades began to break and bend, or were stuck in the hard bones or skulls of the mutated beasts, and could not be pulled out. The war puppets that had lost their weapons were taken down by the swarming mutated beasts, and quickly gathered on the spot into a black mass of flesh that constantly swelled and vibrated. The mass of flesh was made up of hundreds and thousands of mutated beasts, and below it were the war puppets that gradually lost their ability to fight. After a while, when the group of mutated beasts dispersed and rushed to the next opponent, the wreckage of the war puppets under the mass of flesh was revealed. The fall of each war puppet was accompanied by the death of thousands of mutated beasts. The whole battlefield was filled with a pungent smell of blood, and it was getting thicker and thicker, to the point where it was difficult to breathe. Other than becoming a bloody battlefield for wizards and disaster creatures, the Black Ink Valley was also a battlefield of two different plane laws. The sorcerer world couldn't compare to the disaster plane in terms of size and rank. However, the Deep Ink Valley was the sorcerer's home ground, and the sorcerer world's planar laws still held a significant advantage here. The power of order and the power of chaos clashed violently in the void that everyone couldn't see with the naked eye. It was like two extremely large octopuses that first came into contact with each other with their thick tentacles and fleshy tentacles. Both sides used the laws of the world as their bodies and the laws of the plane as their tentacles, frantically entangling and devouring each other, attempting to extend their chains of laws into a larger and wider plane. The plane was their battlefield, the chains of laws were their weapons, and the laws of the plane were their blades. This kind of struggle and entanglement seemed to occur in every corner of the Black Ink Valley, and in every plane. On the whole, as the Magus faction advanced step by step, the Magus world's laws of the plane had already taken back control of the plane around the Black Ink Valley, and slowly suppressed the power of disaster to the bottom of the Black Ink Valley. However, the power of disaster became abnormally tenacious and difficult to deal with. With the support of the souls of a few lesser disaster lords, they firmly defended the space, not giving the Magus will any chance to infiltrate. As long as the Magus will could not become the ruler there, it would always be a scar on the Magus world's barrier. As long as the Grade 6 disaster Lord Dilmas continued to pour its disaster aura into the spatial rift, a crack would eventually appear there, allowing a terrifying guy like Dilmas to project its full power into the spatial rift. When that happened, there would be no power in the Magus world that could stop a rank 6 creature from wreaking havoc. Grimm stood quietly at the entrance of the valley, silently sensing the changes and operation of the laws of the plane. Usually, these things were hidden behind the scenes, and it was impossible for him to observe and sense them so unscrupulously. However, this was a crucial moment where two different world forces were competing against each other. As the main force of this planar war, Grimm was naturally given preferential treatment by the planar consciousness. He did not retaliate in any way against Grimm's spiritual consciousness. This gave Grimm a rare opportunity to observe the power of the world. Something like the power of the world had completely exceeded Grimm's understanding and acceptance. Perhaps he would only be able to study it to a certain extent after advancing to rank 6. However, as a mysterious force that was even more majestic than the power of laws, observing the collision of the power of the world gave Grimm many inspirations and insights. At the very least, comparing the power of laws he had grasped to the power of the world, Grimm could vaguely see the correct path of development. The latter was like a lighthouse erected for Grimm from infinity, although he still did not have the qualifications to touch and control such a power. However, this power itself revealed to him the truest and most primitive side of the world. With this understanding, Grimm would be able to take fewer detours on the path of laws compared to others. This was what Grimm treasured the most. The power of laws was a powerful force produced when a plane operated according to a certain set of laws. The power of the world was a type of original force that was condensed from the billions of living beings and matter within the plane. Magi who grasped the power of laws were like tumors that parasitized the laws of the plane. They relied on the operation of the laws of the plane to obtain power, and they could also borrow the operation of the laws to attack their enemies. Grade 4 Magi were like macrophages in the Magus world. They were usually looked after by the plane's consciousness and relied on the power of laws to grow stronger. However, in the event of a plane invasion, they were also the main force of the Magus world to defend against the foreign invaders. They formed the first line of defense of the plane. Someone like Grimm, who had surpassed the limits of laws in advance, had completed the leap from laws to laws, but had not truly advanced to rank 5. This made him one of the strangest existences in the Magus world. Hence, in this battlefield where two types of world forces clashed, he had seen, comprehended, and gained much more than other magi. However, as the number one fighter in the Magus world, the plane's consciousness was constantly tempting Grimm through the laws of the plane. Inexplicably, a sense of disgust and hatred towards the disaster creatures rose from the depths of Grimm's consciousness, as if he had an irreconcilable hatred towards the disaster creatures. Fortunately, Grimm had gained quite a bit of understanding of the methods of the plane's consciousness over the years. Hence, the impurities that were forced in from the outside were all blocked by Grimm's consciousness, slowly settling and filtering to the bottom of his sea of consciousness. They would no longer affect his true senses. However, through these methods of consciousness invasion, Grimm had discovered many new ways to use the power of the natural order. If he could control the law of fire like the plane's consciousness, the power of his flames would definitely increase to a whole new level. He would become as terrifying and dangerous as those demons. Ever since the calamity creatures were pushed back to the bottom of Ink Abyss, the Magi of the Association had been in charge of the subsequent battles. A peak-level Magus like Grimm only needed to sit at the back and recuperate while waiting for the final battle. The other Tier 4 Magi took turns to attack the bottom of the valley, whittling away at the life force of the calamity creatures. Unfortunately, the 4 lesser disaster lords seemed to have vanished without a trace, hiding in the mist at the bottom of the valley and refusing to show their faces. This made the Association anxious, but there was nothing they could do. They could only increase the intensity of their attacks on the defensive line of the calamity creatures every day. The battle was still going on the slope. Every inch of land and every inch of space had been filled with tons of blood and corpses. The bottom of Ink Abyss Valley was like a huge slaughterhouse. No one could stand still or look straight at it. The previous victory had obviously boosted the fighting spirit of the Tier 4 Magi. They were no longer afraid, nor did they retreat. Instead, their fighting spirit soared as they fought on the front lines every day, killing one extremely powerful calamity creature after another. The Tier 4 Magi from the central region were also encouraged and tempted by the battle. They could not help but join the fray and obtain many results. From their point of view, this was a display of their courage, a display of doing their best for the Magus world. It was a decision made by their own consciousness. However, Grimm, who was a bystander, could clearly see that their souls had more or less been bewitched by the plane's consciousness. However, their actions were only good for Grimm's plan, so Grimm didn't interfere with them. He only used his own power to protect the central Magi when they charged too recklessly. At the very least, under Grimm's supervision, the few lesser disaster lords hiding in the depths of the valley did not dare to openly ambush the central Magi. As for the Magi from other organizations, Grimm did not care about them. Chapter 14-19. Perhaps the influence of the plane's consciousness had played a part in this. However, Grimm's rise was too fast, to the point that even the plane's consciousness felt uneasy. Perhaps it would not be long before the plane's consciousness began to suppress and divide him. It was precisely because he stood at a high enough level and had a broad view of the world that Grimm had a foresight that far surpassed the narrow vision of ordinary Magi. However, in his eyes, the plane's consciousness had lost its mysterious and lofty status. Instead, it had become a potential enemy in the future. Therefore, while the other wizards were passionately resisting the invasion of the calamity creatures, Grimm was carefully calculating his gains and losses, which was a little out of tune with the atmosphere of the scene. The aura of disaster was retreating step by step. The power of disaster occupied the bottom of Ink Abyss Valley, frantically gathering and struggling, trying to break through the suppression of the Magus world's consciousness. The 4 lesser disaster lords also began to move, slowly moving towards the front of the battlefield. An earth-shattering decisive battle was imminent. At this moment, Grimm's brows furrowed slightly. he could vaguely sense a trace of danger. Just as he patted his chest and was about to transform into a flame giant, a somewhat old and familiar figure suddenly appeared above the valley. "Don't be nervous, kid. I'm not here to fight you this time." The familiar old face, the familiar simple magus robe, the familiar pointed hat, and the familiar aura of laws. It was the mysterious old magus who had fought with Grimm before. He was still dressed the same, but his aura did not seem to be as stable as before. Through this, Grimm was even more certain that this was just a projection of a great magus. The old wizard hovered in the air and peeked down into the Rift Valley. When he sensed the extremely strong aura of disaster from the 4 lesser disaster lords, he couldn't help but reveal a grim smile on his face. "Kid, let's make a deal. If I help you deal with this monster, can you give me the heart of the multi-armed giant?" "The heart of the multi-armed giant?" Grimm asked curiously. His opponent was as small as a mosquito in his eyes, and it was as if he could kill him on the spot with a single slap. However, Grimm could sense a gigabyte of magical energy within his opponent's body. It was a power he had never seen before. However, after the last war of laws, the other party seemed to have expended too much mental energy, and when he swept up this magical energy that he had absorbed from who knew where, he seemed to be like a small cow pulling a cart. He became abnormally active and extremely unstable. Yes, there were a total of 4 monsters below. The multi-armed giant and the 10-headed grimace were originally level 5, while the gigantic winged naga and the sandstorm evil spirit were originally level 4. If it was outside of the plane, I'm afraid that even if all the magi of the plane gathered together, it would be difficult to kill one of them, let alone a nest of them. The old sorcerer sneered. Now that they have the guts to enter the magus world, we can take advantage of the time when their strength is suppressed to make them stay. Chapter 1420. The battle at the bottom of the deep Ink Valley was still ongoing. The old wizard's words were harsh, but when he was walking around in stealth mode, he somehow informed the Silver Alliance of the battle plan. The Silver Alliance's deputy chairman, Meloni, thought about it for a long time and finally relayed the news to the Wizard Association and the Northern Witches. Deputy Chairman Meloni of the Silver SE Alliance pondered for a long time and finally passed the message to the Wizard Association and the Northern Witches. As a result, the 4 factions active on the battlefield received the news and started to lure the calamity creatures out without making a sound. Fortunately, the central region had a legendary wizard, which made the other forces look at the central region in a new light. Otherwise, if they did not know such confidential information, they would have been tricked by the other 3 forces to the front line like fools and become the victims of this terrible war together with the lesser disaster lords. Otherwise, if they didn't know about such confidential information, it was very likely that they would be tricked by the other 3 families into going to the front lines like fools and become sacrifices in this terrifying war together with the lesser disaster lords. After these days of getting along, their previous resistance towards Grimm had been replaced by a different kind of respect and admiration. After these days of getting along, their previous resistance towards Grimm had been replaced by a different kind of respect and admiration. In their hearts, Grimm's prestige was also growing day by day. If not for that, when they heard that an earth-shattering war was about to break out, they would have lost control of themselves long ago. How could they fight and retreat so calmly, luring the enemies at the bottom of the valley step by step to the entrance of the Rift Valley? A day passed in the blink of an eye, and the rank 5 fire divine spell, Scorched Earth, in the Vulcan bead finally finished charging. Due to the lack of reinforcements, the Wizard Association finally could not hold on any longer. After the 6,000-man magic armor squad was wiped out by the horde of mutated beasts, the Wizard Association could only send in the Wizard Beast Army again. This gave the disaster creatures a chance to fight back. Among the 4 lesser disaster lords, the most difficult one to deal with was the 10-headed terror ghost. The power of the rule it controlled was the most disgusting spiritual plague. It could transmit the power of disaster into the mind of every creature through the layer of the rule, and it ignored magic resistance. It could be said that if its power was not suppressed, it could directly infect a rank 3 beginner wizard. Not to mention those low and mid-level wizards and wizard beasts who did not have any psychic defense abilities. Seeing a large number of wizard beasts swarming over, not only did 10-headed ghost Moo Gus not show the slightest bit of fear, it even rushed over excitedly. Under the envelopment of its terrifying law halo, a large number of wizard beasts fell to the ground as soon as they charged into the battlefield, beginning the painful and evil transformation process. It only took half a minute for the wizards who were infected with the soul plague to mutate into mutant beasts under the influence of the disaster aura. Their allegiance had also changed from the human wizards to the high-grade calamity creatures. The Sorcerer Association had invested nearly 100,000 wizard beasts this time, but Magoo's alone had lured more than 30,000 of them over. With this, the battle situation at the bottom of the Black Ink Valley was instantly reversed. With great difficulty, they managed to advance 3 miles with a large number of sacrifices. They were only 1 step away from the bottom of the valley. It was at this moment that the calamity creatures launched a massive counterattack. The mutated beasts swept up the wizard beasts that had just been infected, and under the command of the high-level lords, they erupted once again like a black and red turbid stream. They surged out of the entire Earth Fissure Canyon and started to crazily pounce toward the war wizard towers that had just been built. As for the wizard beast army that had charged into the Black Ink Valley, they were now alone, surrounded by enemies that were several times their size. They could only barely hold on in the midst of the beast. The human wizards following behind the wizard beast army were all as cunning as ghosts. They turned tail and ran the moment they saw that the situation was not looking good, hiding in the nearby war wizard towers in time. Thus, the battle once again returned to the state it was before. A large number of black and red mutated beasts charged at the human wizard's camp like a rolling torrent, turning the surroundings of the valley upside down. The 4 lesser disaster lords also mixed in with the group of mutated beasts, silently sneaking up to Grimm's side. In the entire human sorcerer camp, they were most afraid of this legendary fire sorcerer. Thus, before the final battle broke out, they wanted to eliminate this legendary fire wizard the most. Unexpectedly, the legendary fire wizard, who was as tall as a giant, did not conjure up a ring of flames or a burning domain. Instead, he retreated step by step. When he sensed the presence of the lesser disaster lords, he knelt on one knee and raised his hands in front of him to conjure up 2 barriers of laws that barely concealed his body. One was supported by the Book of Darkness, the other by the Divine Fire Orb, the 2 stacked together, increasing Grimm's defense by 1,000 times. What was this legendary fire wizard doing? He seemed to be defending against something. Could it be the 4 lesser disaster lords had only sneaked halfway when they suddenly realized that something was wrong? They abruptly turned around and saw a wizarding wizard waving at them with a smile. He was wearing a simple wizard robe, with a rope tied around his waist, a pointy hat on his head, and a magic staff in his hand. He looked like an old scholar. At the next moment, a violent magic energy that had reached a certain extreme level of energy burst out from the old wizard's body. It was like an extremely violent crimson tide had burst the old wizard's body, emitting endless light and heat as it rose into the sky. It was as if a dozen bombs had exploded beside him at the same time, or as if a miniaturized tide had suddenly jumped out of the horizon. The temperature around the entire Black Ink Valley instantly reached 1,000,000 degrees, and as the magical energy rampaged, the temperature continued to rise rapidly. With the old wizard's self-detonation as the center, everything within 3 miles that was not protected by magic, regardless of whether it was sturdy or not, disintegrated under the impact of the energy wave and was torn into pieces that could not be seen with the naked eye. The ground closest to the point of the explosion quickly cracked and withered, and the remaining soil and gravel instantly vaporized and disappeared without a trace. The greenish-brown bedrock that had been exposed to the scorching sun quickly melted away like snow, and a thickness of more than 10 meters was melted away. The black and red turbid flow that had filled the valley just a moment ago was directly burned to ashes by the terrifying heat in the next moment, and then scattered dozens of miles away as the violent energy shock wave swept out. Grim curled up his body and did his best to widen the two nomological barriers, and only then was he able to block the wild energy that was crashing down on him. The barriers crackled like a torrential storm. Even though the nomological barriers were tough and solid, they were still riddled with holes from the impact of the wild energy wave, and the light of the rules on them flickered. Grim had already done his best to resist the power of the old wizard's self-detonation, and it was only with the help of the 2 Grade 5 divine weapons that he had managed to survive the wild energy wave. The 4 lesser disaster lords who had been caught between Grim and the self-detonation were instantly met with tragedy. Of the 2 Grade 5 lesser disaster lords, the multi-armed giant was a suitable T-type, and also had a thick and sturdy defense against Odjour. Seeing that the situation wasn't looking good, it hurriedly covered its head with its hands and curled up its entire body, using its thick and tough back to resist the wild energy wave. Although it was extremely miserable, it had in the end managed to survive this round of attacks without any danger. It was just that after the first round of wild energy, the blood on its back had been shaved off by more than 5 fingers, and its originally tall and mighty body was instantly drenched in blood. Through the charred blood, one could vaguely see the blackened internal organs inside its body. As for the other Grade 5 lesser disaster lord, the 10-headed horrifying ghost, it mainly had a psionic ability, so its physical defense naturally couldn't compare to that of the multi-armed giant, which had taken the T-type route. Thus, the damage that this round of wild energy wave had done to it was extremely terrifying. The terrifyingly high temperature, the terrifying energy shock wave, the terrifying energy radiation. Any one of them was enough to peel off a layer of its pee, and together, they were enough to rip off Magooza's K. If the 2 Grade 5 creatures were already in such a state, the other 2 Grade 4 lesser disaster lords were even more miserable. If it wasn't for the fact that their T-types were so terrifyingly strong, the old wizard's self-detonation would have been enough to kill them. The terrifyingly high temperature burned their bodies red, and the terrifying energy shock wave sent their scales and hair flying. The terrifying energy radiation caused their skin to rapidly corrode and fester, and huge spots of black blood covered in pustules appeared. Their eyeballs swelled and burst from the high temperature, and the hair and scales on the surface of their bodies fell off in large chunks. The exposed skin was so festering that it was impossible to look at it directly. The 2 of them rolled wildly on the ground in pain. When their nectar-covered wounds and crimson blood touched the similarly red lava ground, there was a terrifying sizzling sound, as if they were being roasted. Even the 7 war wizard towers, which had been too close to the explosion point, melted like baked cakes in the terrifying wild energy wave, let alone these unconcealed disaster creatures. Naturally, the wizards inside were not spared either. After withstanding the most ferocious wave of the wild energy wave, Grim retracted the law barrier that was riddled with holes, revealing his bloody body. When he stood up, 7 magi from the central continent appeared behind him, ready to attack. Clara, Alfred, Declan, Matthew, Nicholas, Ariza, Roderick. They were surrounded by colorful elemental barriers. They looked up at the terrifying battlefield that was full of devastation, and their gazes instantly fell on the 4 pitiful lesser disaster lords. It could not be helped, the entire battlefield had been washed clean by the energy wave. The other mutated beasts, wizard beasts, and disaster creatures had all turned into ashes and disappeared without a trace. Apart from the 4 of them, there was not a single living creature in the battlefield. Normally, magi of the central continent would flee at the mere sight of a lesser disaster overlord that possessed such terrifying might. But at this moment, their gazes were filled with endless greed and unconcealable passion as they looked at each other. Take advantage of their weakness. Kill. Chapter 14:21. Valiance and HP. How could the Magi of the central continent have these two attributes? In the past, this would have been a joke that would have made people laugh their heads off. But today, in the bloody and cruel planar battlefield, this had become reality. Clara and the others who had created this miracle were unaware of it. They only knew how to use the wildest and most ferocious spells to kill the prey in front of them. Yes, these terrifying monsters that had once lived in their nightmares had now become their prey. All they had to do was tear off a bit of HP from their opponent's bloody body, and they would be able to record their sacred and glorious feats in the history books of the Magus world. It was a kind of glory, but it was also a kind of faith. They turned into endless motivation and courage, pushing the 7 wizards of the central continent to charge at the heavily injured lesser disaster lord without a care for their own safety. Bastards! You ants! How dare you harm my body? I will make you pay the price. While roaring, thick black smoke drifted out of the 10-headed terrifying ghost Gus body that was like soft mud. Inside the smoke, there were innumerable terrifying ghost faces coiled around it. Under its command, the ghostly faces shrieked as they broke free from the black smoke and rushed toward the human wizards around them. Mother of Light, Flame Protection. Grim, who looked like an ancient fire giant, roared and waved his hand to scatter a halo of light. These halos fell on the human magi and immediately turned into dark red flame halos, perfectly covering their bodies. As soon as the ghostly faces came into contact with the ring of flames, they exploded and turned into a ball of fire. They howled miserably and desperately dodged, but obviously could not escape the entanglement of the flames. Soon, the flames burned the resentment cores in their tanks, and the scary faces turned into ashes and disappeared without a trace. These faces were formed from the power of laws in the 10-headed ghoul's tank. They could ignore defense and infect any living tank, and could even devour the opponent's HP. With such terrifying power, even in the outer space, it would be a great weapon against plane creatures. However, it was a pity that even a Tier 5 creature like Grim could not forcibly infect these Tier 4 human sorcerers with Grim's law flames. Clara and the others, who were immune to Magoo's rule attack, had already cast a series of spells on it. Dark Seal, Infrasound Explosion, Water Dragon Assault, The Wrath of Nature. Under everyone's cover, Dilklen charged forward with light swirling around his body and fought the enraged 10-headed horrifying ghost to the death. Behind him, Ariza had already transformed into a human lion and was roaring loudly as he followed. As for Matthew, who was the weakest among them, he summoned 3 Grade 4 magical beasts and charged forward to engage the other lesser disaster lords. In the distance, a large number of wizards from the Silver Say Alliance, the Northern Witches, and the Wizard Association had also rushed out of the Wizard's Pagoda, racing against time as they charged toward Yongling. Even though the lesser disaster lord was heavily injured, it was not to the point where it could not fight back. Seeing that the situation was turning for the worse, it could not care less about fighting the human sorcerers anymore. It turned around and pounced toward the canyon behind it. Only by escaping there and gathering a group of subordinates would they have the time and energy to slowly heal their heavily injured bodies. Even though these injuries looked serious, they were only minor injuries. As long as they had enough time and energy, it would not be difficult for them to recover. Focus on attacking the giant winged serpent. Don't bother with the 10-headed ghoul. Grim quickly sent a telepathic message to his companions, while he stepped forward to stop the low-profile multi-armed giant who was trying to sneak away. As soon as Clara and the others got into the fight, they realized how terrifying the 10-headed horrifying ghost was. Even though they had the protection of Grim's law flames and the support of the plane's consciousness, Under the endless attacks of the 10-headed ghoul, many of the central sorcerers were bleeding profusely, and they were badly injured. A rank 5 creature was a rank 5 creature, after all. Grim might be able to fight them head-on without falling into a disadvantageous position, but ordinary rank 4 sorcerers like them had to work together to deal with a heavily injured rank 5 lesser disaster lord. The difference in strength between the two sides was obvious. Left with no choice, the 7 central sorcerers could only give up on the seemingly delicious prey and turn their attacks to the giant winged serpent, which was in an equally miserable state. This was only a peak rank 4 lesser disaster lord. Even though it was powerful, it was still being beaten up by the swarm of central sorcerers, unable to extricate itself. "Magooz, lend me a hand. After you save me, I'll give you half of my wealth." The giant winged serpent struggled to defend against a series of terrifying spells, raising its head and crying out for help to its companions. However, the giant winged serpent felt a chill in its heart when it saw the 10-headed ghoul, Magooz, who had broken free from its entanglement, run towards the entrance of the valley without even looking back. There, the silhouettes of 3 human sorcerers descended at high speed, obviously trying to cut off the path of retreat of the J lesser disaster lord. Friendship and trust had never existed between creatures of disaster. They were merely subordinates of the rank 6 lesser disaster lord, and there were all sorts of infighting and scheming between them. The situation was dire, so everyone had to look out for themselves. No one would risk their lives for someone else. Hence, the 4 lesser disaster lords were instantly split into 4 groups, and were intercepted by the J Great Organization. Grim stopped the multi-armed giant by himself, while Clara and the other 6 central sorcerers worked together to stop the giant winged serpent. The 10-headed ghoul was stopped by 3 powerful beings from the association at the entrance of the valley. The only remaining evil sand spirit was snatched by the northern sorcerers, who surrounded it in advance. In comparison, the Silver Alliance, which only had puppeteers, had short legs. They could not react in time, and did not even manage to capture a single lesser disaster lord. Seeing the J Great Organization besieging their prey without a care for their own safety, Meloni, the vice-chairman of the Silver Alliance, flew into a rage. He almost couldn't help himself from snatching the prey from the central sorcerers. However, when he saw Grim's massive body and recalled the terrifying rank 5 divine fire spell, Meloni's anger dissipated inexplicably. All that was left was a series of coughs and sighs. Right now, he could only hope that the central sorcerers would not be able to take down the pinnacle rank 4 giant winged serpent. That way, the Silver Alliance would still have a chance. However, after observing for a while, Meloni could only shake his head in disappointment. He turned around and led the Alliance sorcerers to the bottom of the valley to see if they could find any valuable spoils of war. The battle was as fierce and brutal as ever. Although the human sorcerers had the absolute advantage, it was still difficult for them to take down the powerful lesser disaster lords. Of course, if the human sorcerers were as fearless as the professional warriors, the battle would have ended long ago, as long as they made some sacrifices. It was precisely because no one wanted to die, nor were they willing to pay a huge price for a prey that was destined to be theirs, that the siege turned into a long war of attrition. The battle against the pinnacle rank 4 giant winged serpent and the evil sand spirit was more daunting than dangerous. Everything was under the control of the central sorcerers and the northern sorcerers. On the other side, the battle between Grim and the Sorcerer Association against the Tier 5 multi-armed giant winged serpent and the 10-headed dreadful wraith was still as perilous as ever. Tier 5 was still Tier 5 after all. Even though the old sorcerer's terrifying self-destruction had cost them half their lives, their remaining strength was still above that of a Tier 4 sorcerer. The multi-armed giant was 5 meters tall, its body glowing with a dazzling earth-like radiance. As long as its feet did not leave the ground, it could continuously absorb a massive amount of earth elemental energy from the ground and condense it into a dense rock armor on its T-form. The two sides of its T-form were densely packed with muscular arms that could continuously condense stone spears or throw boulders at Grimm. The multi-armed giant's strength was even more frightening. Even though Grimm's T-form was several hundred times its size, he was still at a disadvantage in a contest of strength. Grimm had condensed fire elemental energy several times to smash down on the multi-armed giant, but each time, the multi-armed giant used its superior strength to shatter it. Both sides had no choice but to put some distance between them and engage in a tug-of-war. Grimm hurled a series of violent flames at the multi-armed giant, filled with the terrifying inextinguishable flames. Once caught, the multi-armed giant would become indestructible. The multi-armed giant retaliated with boulders the size of mountains, and when they hit Grimm's body, they would explode into fragments of stone shrapnel. Such a terrifying bombardment dealt massive damage to both sides. However, the multi-armed giant relied on its rock armor and indestructible Y-type skin to resist the flames, while Grimm relied on the Book of Darkness to resist the bombardment of the boulders. After suffering such heavy injuries, the multi-armed giant's strength was roughly equal to Grimm's. In such an evenly matched situation, Grimm's two Grade 5 divine weapons became the most important trump card to suppress the enemy. The multi-armed giant, who relied on its tanks to survive, was obviously no match for the legendary fire shaman with two divine weapons. As a result, clusters of golden flames ignited one after another on the multi-armed giant's majestic body, gradually burning it to a crisp. The psychological pressure on the opponent caused him to lose the courage and confidence to continue fighting. The multi-armed giant, Zaku, continued to exchange blows with Grimm while looking around for an opportunity to escape the battlefield. Finally, while Grimm was dealing with the 15 boulders he had hurled in one go, the multi-armed giant, Zaku, raised his many arms at the same time and swung them down. Chapter 1422. Trying to run? Grimm sneered. He raised his right leg, which was as thick as a stone pillar, and stomped on the ground. The entire ground shook violently, and then, with the stomp of his foot as the center, a huge cobweb-like crack with an area of 100 meters cracked open. Then, with a series of strange cracking sounds, the cobweb-like cracks spread out in all directions at lightning speed, and almost instantly, they had spread to a distance of several kilometers. The ground shook and undulated like a rag that had been rubbed, and a terrifyingly deep trench that was several kilometers long was formed. Underneath the ground, there was an even louder roar, as if a huge dragon was struggling and roaring, causing the entire ground to bulge and shatter. The violent and ferocious underground fire was drawn out by Grimm's law of fire, and it quickly surged through the cracks. The steaming heat waves and terrifying streams of flames instantly turned the battlefield into a lava hell that no living creature could step into. "Come out!" Grimm roared, and the law of fire crazily surged into the ground, instantly igniting the lava. At the center of the battlefield, a piece of land with a circumference of 100 meters suddenly burst open. Thousands of tons of broken bedrock mixed with the scorching hot lava turned into pillars of fire that flew into the sky. The multi-armed giant Zaku, who had just burrowed into the ground, didn't even have time to escape from the battlefield before he was blasted into the air by an abnormally thick stream of lava. "You forced me to do this." The multi-armed giant Zaku was also extremely furious. He crazily waved and slapped his arms, stirring up waves of energy that swept towards Grimm like a tide. His heavy body suddenly sank, smashing the lava that was blowing on his body, and quickly falling to the ground. Under the control of the law of earth, a 3-meter thick stone pillar rose from the ground, rumbling as it extended towards Zaku's feet. As long as its thick legs touched the stone pillars, it would continue to absorb a large amount of earth element from the earth, thus maintaining its combat needs. With the help of the AI chip, Grimm had long since seen through it. He roared and grabbed at the air. Large amounts of boiling lava gathered together, forming a lava hand that swept across the horizon with a whoosh. The stone pillar and the giant leg, which were just a hair's breadth away from touching each other, separated with a bang. The stone pillar crumbled, and the multi-armed giant Zaku flew up into the sky like a little bird. "Bastard, you're courting death!" The multi-armed giant Zaku had lost a small part of his body due to his previous self-explosion. Now, Grimm had sent it flying into the sky with his flame power, cutting off its direct connection with the earth. Zaku had become even more berserk. In fact, the so-called multi-armed giant was a variant of the legendary sinful hundred-armed giant. Therefore, just like the legendary Centimanes, it had a mighty divine power and a terrifyingly powerful rule of Earth. Their most basic power was petrification. However, there were no signs of a third eye on the brown forehead of the multi-armed giant, so it was unknown whether it possessed the law of petrification. This was also the only reason why Grimm did not dare to fight it in close combat. However, what he feared had come true. The multi-armed giant, Zagu, had gone berserk to the extreme. The thick and sturdy arms on both sides of his body exploded with a loud bang sound. Only 5 pairs of arms were left at last. The thickest right hand suddenly slashed at its forehead with its fingers like a knife. The flesh there ruptured, and a bloody gap opened up. Then, a strange giant vertical eye squeezed out from within. The surface of the strange vertical eye was smooth and translucent, like an oval-shaped green jade. However, when the eyelid opened and closed, a strange power that could numb one's body was emitted. The power was so great that it was terrifying. "This is the power of petrification that you forced me to use. Go to hell." It seemed that using this power would cause serious damage to Zaku. However, at this moment, in order to break free from the legendary fire wizard Grimm's imprisonment, he had no choice but to use his greatest power. Although he had lost the response of the law of Earth, with the energy reserves of his powerful body and the Earth energy gathered from the explosion of his many arms, Zaku finally succeeded in activating the Eye of Petrification. The incomparably violent Earth element surged into the eye and transformed into a ray that emitted a pale yellow halo. The ray hit Grimm's right arm from 3 miles away. The powerful power of the law of petrification spread everywhere. Even the law flames in Grimm's right arm could not resist the invasion of such a fierce power. His entire arm seemed to be frozen. The flesh, veins, bones, and tendons inside lost their luster at a speed visible to the naked eye. They became gray and hard. In the blink of an eye, the right arm that was hit by the light of petrification had turned into gray stone. The powerful power of the law of petrification quickly spread from his arm to Grimm's shoulder and body. If Grimm did not have the power of the law to protect himself, he would have been petrified the moment the law of petrification touched his flesh. It was precisely because of the large amount of law flames in his body that Grimm managed to buy himself some time to save himself by relying on the collision and repulsion between the two powers of laws. A venomous snake bites the hand, and a brave man cuts his wrist. It was extremely difficult to get rid of the power of the law. Therefore, Grimm did not even have the time to hesitate. He stabbed his left arm into his right shoulder, and the power of flames exploded. His entire right arm and a small part of his right shoulder were blown away. Although such a large body was mostly a projection of witchcraft energy, every strand of energy and every piece of flesh still maintained the closest connection with Grimm's consciousness. Only in this way could he control such a colossal body as though it was his own arm. It was inevitable that Grimm would suffer great damage from the sudden amputation of his arm. However, at this critical moment, he did not have the chance to cry. In such a terrifying high-level battlefield, a moment of absent-mindedness could lead to his death. Grimm endured the pain and forced most of the power of the law of fire into his eyes. The next second, 2 extremely condensed and pure golden rays shot out from his eyes. They streaked across the vast sky, and slashed the body of the multi-armed giant Zhagu. The power of fire had unparalleled penetrative power, and the golden rays of the law of fire had even more shocking cutting power. Wherever the golden rays passed, the remaining arms of the multi-armed giant that could not dodge in time were severed. The rays of light sizzled as they struck Zaku's body, penetrating his organs and causing him so much pain that he wanted to die. He roared in anger. Zaku's single eye turned, and the earthen ray of petrification clashed with Grimm's two golden rays in the air. The power of petrification and the power of fire devoured and destroyed each other, ripples of law power spreading out. All matter or life forms that were swept into the ripples would either instantly turn into statues or explode into torches that soared into the sky with a bang. No matter which one it was, it meant that their lifespans had reached the end of their lives, and there was absolutely no chance of survival. The shock waves from the battle between Grimm and the multi-armed giant covered a large area, and even those caught in the middle of the battle fled in panic. With their strength, if they were caught in the shock waves of this law power, they would not have any chance of survival. Therefore, when the high-dimensional lifeforms fought, the shock waves and stray bullets that spilled out were also very fatal. Moreover, the law power of the high-dimensional beings was formless and intangible, and could not be tracked or locked onto by the naked eye. There was no way to dodge. Moreover, the range of the high-dimensional beings' attacks was extremely wide, and most of them exceeded the limits of the vision or perception of ordinary beings. Hence, ordinary beings had no chance of participating in a high-dimensional battle. Even watching from the sidelines would put their lives at risk. Perhaps this was a huge boundary between humans and gods. According to the classification of power in the world of gods, rank 5 was the standard of a true god. Although the peak of rank 4 was extraordinary, it was still within the limits of humans. Since the start of the battle, Zaku had not dared to engage in close combat with Grimm. One of the main reasons was that he was afraid of the terrifying rank 5 divine fire spell, Scorched Earth. Grimm had used this rank 5 divine fire spell to annihilate a lesser lord of calamity that was stronger than him. Hence, before confirming whether Grimm could still use Scorched Earth, Zaku had made up his mind to not get within 300 meters of Grimm. This was also the shortest distance he had the confidence to avoid Grimm's attack. But now, Grimm did not use a rank 5 divine fire spell, and only relied on the powerful law of fire to force Zaku into a dead end. The golden rays and petrifying rays clashed in midair. Zaku, who was suspended in the air and unable to absorb the earth elemental energy, was undoubtedly at a disadvantage. Hence, the point where the two rays intersected quickly moved towards Zaku. This caused Zaku to break out in cold sweat. Up until now, there were already dozens of golden flames burning quietly on his body. In this battle, he did not have the time or energy to use the law of earth to annihilate them one by one. If Grimm's golden rays extended to his body, even he would not be able to suppress the inextinguishable flames and would be burnt to ashes. Zaku's once densely packed arms were now only left with 3, 2 on the left and 1 on the right. He suddenly beat his chest with his arms, activating the last bit of petrifying energy in his body to force the golden rays away. He then hurriedly sank his body, wanting to dive back into the ground. Grimm was extremely ruthless even though he had only one arm left. He stimulated the divine fire bead in his body to the extreme. He opened his mouth wide, and a dreadful transparent flame gushed out from his mouth. It then hit Zaku's head squarely. Zaku's head was struck by Grimm's attack. With a loud bang, the head of the lesser lord of disaster, Zaku, exploded, and his massive body crashed down like a mountain, creating a terrifying crater in the ground. Grimm relaxed and let out a long breath. Chapter 1423. Accidents were bound to happen in the planar battlefield. As they had hoped, the 4 lesser calamity lords had all been killed. The Magi had also paid a heavy price, with one person each from the central region and one from the association dying. The one from the central region was Ariza, killed by the giant winged serpent's final counterattack. On the other hand, the one from the association was Shribber, the slightly famous Grade 4 fire magus. Although the death of a Tier 4 sorcerer was unexpected, it was still within reason. After all, the Calamity Lords were powerful creatures that ran amok in the multiverse. Their combat power was enough to crush human magi of the same rank in all aspects. Moreover, 3 of the 5 lesser Calamity Lords that had invaded the Deep Ink Valley were Grade 5 creatures. To be honest, the fact that the human magi had only sacrificed 2 lives to capture them all in one fell swoop was beyond imagination. It had to be known that if fellows like Five-Face, Magoo's, and Zagu had invaded an ordinary material plane, the enemy might not have been able to kill them even with the full power of the plane. Thus, the most common story was that a level surpassing Star Beast or Lord of Calamity had barged into a plane world and turned it upside down, devouring most of its resources and living beings. Only then was it forced out by the powerhouses of that plane world, who were determined to die. In order to chase such a terrifying creature away, that plane would have to lose at least half of its powerhouses. The price they had to pay could not be said to be small. And this was even if the expulsion was successful. Those that were not would end up with their planes damaged and their lives in misery. From time to time, the wreckage of broken planes could be seen in the outer space. This was the fate of those planes that had failed. This was an era of great competition. The weaker and undeveloped planes either had to hide themselves and not be found by powerful planes like the Abyss or Disaster, or they had to seize every second to develop and strengthen themselves, using their valiant strength to stop the planar raiders who were eyeing them covetously. And the only way they could grow was by conquering other planes and worlds, plundering resources, abducting populations, plundering knowledge, and extracting souls. It was only through such a method that they could develop and strengthen by leaps and bounds, rapidly growing past their infancy and thus carving out a place of their own amongst the champions of the multiverse. In the entire multiverse, there were only a few in the first tier: Calamity, Abyss, Titan. From all aspects, the 3 of them were the most powerful. Their numbers were spread across the entire multivariate universe, and no one dared to provoke them. The sorcerer civilization belonged to the second echelon at most, and it was still at the lower middle level. Within this echelon were the world of gods, the elemental plane, the demon eye empire, the dragon kingdom, the elven empire, the soul realm, the shadow realm. In terms of strength, the elemental planes could be ranked in the top echelon, on par with the calamities and titans. However, the elemental lords and lords were too undisciplined and free, and didn't have any desire to expand or conquer. Thus, many existences defined elemental creatures as harmless creatures. As long as you didn't provoke them, they would never be willing to step out of the elements realm to do the hard work of expanding their territory. The Arcane Kingdom was originally qualified to squeeze into the second echelon, but it was a pity that it couldn't resist the strong invasion of many enemies. The plane fell, and the remnants of its members were scattered in the Star Sea. After the second echelon, there were the so-called third-rate forces. Such organizations and forces were simply too many in the multivariate universe. Even the Great Alliance of Liches, which Grimm had dealt with before, was such a third-rate force. Although there were several powerful and terrifying Lich Kings in it, the number of members was too small, which was the fundamental reason why they couldn't develop and grow. Similarly, there were Star Beasts. There were hundreds of millions of Star Beasts, and their numbers were astonishing. They were spread throughout the endless Star Sea, and they were constantly attacking and killing each other. They were powerful creatures that acted on instinct. Although their strength was amazing, they didn't have the corresponding high intelligence. They were like omnipresent scavengers in the multivariate universe, wandering in the depths of the Star Sea and feeding on the creatures of the plains. Although there were many of them, they were never able to form a commendable force. Therefore, although the star beasts were powerful, they couldn't enter the ranking of the intelligent races. Only by understanding the strength of the disaster creatures could one truly understand the value of the victory in the deep Ink Valley. Of course, this was also because the demon wave had just erupted, and the true powerhouses of the disaster plane, who had been asleep for thousands of years, the domain lords, had yet to awaken. If the domain lords above rank 7 were to awaken, the rank 5 and 6 disaster lords wouldn't have the chance to make a scene here. However, at that time, it would be time for the great sorcerers of the outer regions to intervene. Strictly speaking, the battle in the deep Ink Valley was not an official war between the sorcerer civilization and the disaster plane. It was just an attack on the sorcerer world by a rank 6 disaster lord on a whim. Naturally, the great sorcerers of the outer regions had no interest in participating in such a small skirmish. In any case, a rank 6 disaster lord could not swallow the entire sorcerer world. It was a good opportunity to use this to train the younger generation in the plane, giving them a chance to turn the tide and stand out. They didn't care if they lost more rank 4 disaster lords. What they really cared about was whether a rank 4 disaster lord would use this opportunity to rise to rank 5. Only such an individual had the qualifications to be slightly concerned. After all, the sorcerers of the outer regions had their own sorcerer organizations of various sizes. It was not a bad thing to be able to rope in a new member of their organization. Hence, a powerful sorcerer like Grimm, who was already half a step into rank 5, would soon have a large number of organizations from the outer regions trying to rope him in. After a great battle, the process of reaping the spoils of war was always a joyous one. Regarding Ariza's death, a few sorcerers of the central continent gathered together and held a simple mourning ceremony before sealing up his remains and belongings. When they returned to the central continent in the future, these things would be returned to Ariza's clansmen untouched. As for how they would inherit and divide Ariza's wealth and territory, that would be up to the Manso family. As the ruler of the central continent, Grimm had no choice but to express his gratitude. On account of Ariza's accidental death for the sake of the central continent, he gave the Manso family 100 years of protection. Within these 100 years, the Manso family would still enjoy the treatment of a rank 4 faction and receive the protection of the Crimson family. They would not be attacked by any other sorcerer family. After 100 years, if the Manso family was lucky enough to have a rank 4 sorcerer, they would naturally be able to continue ruling over their vast territory. However, if they still did not have a rank 4 sorcerer, they would be reduced to an ordinary rank 3 faction. At that time, the huge territory of the Manso family would become a fat piece of meat that the surrounding sorcerer families would salivate over. This sort of survival of the fittest was in line with the development of the central continent, so Grimm would not interfere. After dealing with Ariza's matter, the next step was to divide the spoils of war. In this battle, the central continent and Grimm had obtained a rank 5 multi-armed giant and a rank 4 giant-winged serpent. Grimm had taken down the multi-armed giant by himself, so all the spoils of war belonged to him alone. The giant-winged serpent would be split among the remaining 6 sorcerers. However, as the number 1 sorcerer of the central continent, Grimm naturally had the right to choose one of the spoils of war. This could be considered a form of tribute and filial piety from Clara and the others. With the remains of 2 rank 5 lesser lords of disaster already in his bag, Grimm was already full of food and did not need to be too harsh on Clara and the others. Hence, after Grimm symbolically took away most of the blood of the giant-winged serpent, he gave Clara and the others the right to divide it. Grimm had only asked for this bit of blood for Mary. The 6 rank 4 sorcerers of the central continent immediately hid in a corner excitedly, arguing with each other until their faces turned red. It took them a full 10 hours to completely divide the giant-winged serpent. Declan, who had put in the most effort, naturally got the lion's share. he obtained most of the giant winged serpent's skeleton and several hundred kilograms of flesh. Clara and Alfred, on the other hand, worked together to obtain the terrifying pair of wings and a small amount of flesh. As for how they would divide it, that was up to them. Matthew obtained the remnant soul of the giant winged serpent. With this offering, it would not be a problem for him to sign another rank 4 creature from another world. Nicholas, on the other hand, obtained the dragon crystal. Looking at his beaming face, it seemed that the thing was really useful to him. Roderick, on the other hand, had obtained the scales of the giant winged serpent dragon and a pair of front claws. These were top-grade materials that were hard to find in the world to forge some powerful magic tools. If Clara and the others ate to their heart's content, then Grimm's trip could be said to be a fruitful one. The Type 5 multi-headed Hydra lizard had given him 4 top-tier elemental crystals and a Type 5 poison law crystal. Among them, the Tier 5 law crystal had already been devoured by Remy, who was inside the Book of Darkness. It could be predicted that once it completely digested this treasure, the plague poison spirit Remy would definitely become a super-grade artifact spirit. At that time, it would be qualified to truly wield this rank 5 divine artifact. Grimm had used the level 5 fire divine spell, Scorched Earth, when he had killed Penta. The power of the spell was too great, and the quality of the loot was greatly reduced. As for the Tier 5 multi-armed giant, Zaku had been killed instantly by Grimm's all-out attack. Hence, with its body intact, it had provided Grimm with even more treasures and materials. Chapter 1424. Multi-Armed Giant's Heart. Peak Tier 5 Material, Powerful Vitality. Immersed in the Law of Earth. Can be used as a life extension ritual material. Can also be used to create Tier 5 Earth-type enchanted items. Multi-Armed Giant's Eye. Peak Tier 5 Material. Crystallization of the Law of Earth. Able to transform any magical energy into petrifying energy and immerse it in the Law of Earth. Multi-Armed Giant's Headless Body. Peak Tier 5 Bloodline Power. Abundant Source Energy of Earth. Can be extracted to refine high-grade bloodline potions. Can be transformed into high-grade undead. Can be used to create top-grade corpse puppets. Can be used as a top-grade sacrificial material. Killing a lesser disaster lord was enough to instantly turn a Tier 4 magus into one of the wealthiest people in the otherworld. This was a Tier 5 creature. Just a little bit of its blood, flesh, or tendon would be a top-grade Tier 5 material. In the sorcerer world, Tier 5 materials could be counted on one's fingers. They were practically priceless. Even if they appeared occasionally, they would sell for tens of thousands of mana crystals per gram. And now, there was a 5-meter-tall, 7-ton monster here. It was a top-notch material that was far more valuable and coveted than the magic crystal mountain. If Grimm was willing to sell it, this Zaku's remains would be enough to buy 2 or 3 complete territories in the central continent. After all, with these materials, a certain Tier 4 sorcerer could very well become a Tier 5 great sorcerer. Although the central continent was rich in resources, they could not provide any help to high-grade magi. Hence, if Grimm really dared to sell it, the 3 sorcerer organizations present would most likely fight over it. After all, territory, resources, and population could be accumulated slowly, but a Tier 5 Great Magus was something that could only be found by chance. Which was more important between the two, it was something that anyone could easily judge. Meanwhile, the Sorcerer Association had also obtained a 10-headed terror ghost. It was also a Tier 5 Great Magus, but its quality was obviously inferior to the multi-armed giant in Grimm's hands. Even so, the Sorcerer Association should be able to produce a Tier 5 Great Magus. The only unknown was whether the Sorcerer Association would choose Anri or Gloria. Both were super powerhouses with decent strength. With this bit of help, reaching Tier 5 shouldn't be a problem. In addition, the Northern Witch had also obtained a peak Tier 4 Evil Sand Spirit. With these resources, creating another peak Tier 4 which would be a very likely thing. This was something worth celebrating for the northern lands, which currently only had 2 super experts. As for the giant winged serpent dragon that the central continent's magi worked together to take down, if they did not split it up, it was very likely that someone in the central continent would become a peak rank 4 magus. But now that it was so scattered, it could only allow everyone's strength to improve a little bit. It no longer had the terrifying effect of creating gods. Since everyone had gained something, the sorrow of losing 2 Tier 4 companions was lessened. On the Silver Alliance's side, Deputy Chairman Meloni's face was as dark as a rag. It couldn't be helped. The Silver Alliance relied too much on metal golems and puppets. Their fighting style was more defensive and counterattacking, and they liked to use golems and puppets to consume the enemy's strength. This caused them to be unaccustomed to this kind of quick attack style battle, and they lost the best chance to obtain the loot. In the battle just now, other than the rank 4 fire wizard, Schreber, the Sorcerer Association had lost more than 500 magi of various rank. However, in this planar battlefield, only Tier 4 magi would receive serious attention from the various organizations. If a lot of Tier 3 magi were lost, some might feel regretful and distressed, but it would not be as heart-wrenching as losing a Tier 4 magus. As for magi below Tier 3 who died, as long as they were not seriously injured, they would be ignored by the high-ranking magi, intentionally or unintentionally. After all, the major sorcerer organizations knew this. The true value of a Tier 5 Great Magus was far more than 10 Tier 4 magi, and a Tier 4 magus was far more than 10 Tier 3 magi. Going by this logic, the number of high-ranking magi would always be small, and they were at the top of the pyramid of the sorcerer civilization. Of course, Tier 5 Great Magi could only squeeze into the middle of the sorcerer civilization, and there was still a long way to go before they could truly reach the peak. However, to the low and mid-ranked magi who were struggling bitterly within the plane, they were already gods that were unreachable. Outside the sorcerer world's plane barrier. This was a perfect plane of unparalleled size. Violent energy waves hit the sorcerer world's plane barrier, causing dazzling and beautiful sparks to fly. The sorcerer world, which was like a huge ship, remained motionless in the sea of energy. No matter how the void storm blew, it could not shake the plane barrier in the slightest. It seemed to be motionless on the surface, but if one looked at the entire sea of stars, one would find that the sorcerer world was moving at a speed of tens of miles per second, following some kind of profound and mysterious law, drifting through the storm, through the translucent light membrane of the sorcerer world's plane barrier. One could vaguely see the large-scale sorcerer continent and the undulating mountain ranges on it. But at this moment, outside the plane barrier, there was a strange-looking 3-headed hellhound crouching. It was 100 meters tall, and the surface of its body was covered with thick, glossy black fur. From its neck, 3 canine heads stretched out. Looking at the 10-meter-tall flame humanoid, looking at the unusually docile flames lingering around it, and sensing the huge flame power in the other party's body, the 3-headed hellhound Dilma's heart suddenly tightened, and it coldly squeezed out a name from between its teeth. Fire Goddess Renai, what are you doing here? It wasn't Renai's true body that had come, but a rank 6 fire clone. If it really was Renai's true body, Dilma's wouldn't have wasted any time talking to her. He would have definitely slipped away the moment he sensed her aura. The tall man strolled until he was 10,000 meters away from Dilma's, stopping to focus. The golden flames in his eyes were extremely eye-catching. Leave this place, Dilma's. If you leave, I'll pretend I didn't see you. Otherwise. Renai's clone's words were so resolute that Dilma's was obviously displeased. Renai, this is the Magus world, not your vassal country. Since when did you have the right to give orders here? What, you're a rank 7 fire goddess, and yet you're selling your life to the Magi. A fierce expression appeared on Dilma's pitch-black mane head. His body bent down slightly, his throat trembling as he let out a low, threatening howl. I'm here to take back my item. That damned wizard stole my treasure, Renai's clone said fiercely. I have to punish him today. Leave, I need this crack. Dilma's froze for a moment, then nodded silently. No wonder I smelled the scent of your fire magic in the plane. It turns out that your artifact was taken away by a wizard. Heh heh, Renai, since we're both here to make trouble for the wizards, why don't we? However, before Dilma's could finish, Renai's clone stomped her foot, and a sea of flames rose around her. Shut up, she shouted angrily. We gods will never associate ourselves with creatures of disaster like you. Get out of here, or we'll fight. Chapter 1425. Without a doubt, Diarmas retreated gloomily. If the enemy before him was just a clone of Renai, he wouldn't have hesitated to fight it out. Even tearing off a few pieces of flesh would be a considerable victory. But he didn't dare. His senses were sharp. It could sense that the Class 7 fire goddess Renai had been paying attention to the clone all this time. If he didn't know what was good for him, the goddess of fire would probably descend upon this place with the help of her clone. Dilma's was only at level 6, and if he really ran into the level 7 goddess of fire, he was destined to die here. Hence, he could only swallow his anger and retreat in the face of the overbearing level 6 Renai's clone. Having chased Dilma's away, Renai's clone slowly approached the rift in the plane's barrier. With a sudden roar, she plunged her hands into the rift and tore it apart. Raging divine power of fire and the unstoppable force of plane healing clashed, causing dense spatial ripples to appear on the smooth and flat plane's barrier. A ferocious tide of mana rolled in from the distance, surging into the plane through the rift that was growing larger and larger. It gathered into a terrifying energy storm in Black Ink Valley. As the goddess of fire, Renai was a powerful god with a fiery temperament, unyielding and tyrannical. In her eyes, there was no room for negotiation with her enemy. A single word of disagreement would result in a direct confrontation. As a goddess of fire with level 7 strength, she certainly had the capital and strength to ignore any opponent. At the very least, in the tens of thousands of years since she'd ascended to godhood, she'd fought her way from a lesser god, level 5, to a greater god, level 7. Although she was still far from becoming a lord god, level 9, her fiery temperament had completely solidified into a part of her divine power. That was why she couldn't hold back her rage when she sensed the familiar undulations of flames on the other side of the rift. She tore at the rift with all her might, trying to force her way in. The entire Black Ink Valley was immediately turned upside down by her reckless actions. Unknowingly, the entire Black Ink Valley had already become a doomsday ruin. Blood-colored fire clouds rolled in the sky, blocking the scorching sun and causing the entire world to be enveloped in a dark red halo. An unknown energy tide rushed out of the Black Ink Valley and slowly revolved around the valley, condensing into a huge storm vortex. The earth split open, revealing the huge crack that was branded on the plane barrier deep underground. At this moment, there was a huge flaming humanoid climbing out with great effort. Its size might not be too huge, but the power it contained was clearly beyond the limits of what the sorcerer world could bear. Therefore, the powerful plane healing force surged from all directions, squeezing the torn plane crack, trying to mend it again. The huge flaming figure stuck in the crack raised its head and let out a deafening roar as it struggled to tear at the edge of the crack, trying its best to enter the sorcerer world. The congealed flaming hands and the uneven plane crack continuously clashed. At the point where the two forces clashed, there were dense space fragments collapsing from the crack. As for the two flaming hands, they treated the space fragments with shocking cutting power as if they were nothing. Resplendent flame divine power flowed on them, blocking all external forces from harming them. Crack! There was another explosion. The plane crack was torn even wider, and a head of the flaming figure crawled in. Then, it took a deep breath and slowly opened its mouth to spit out a strange colorless and transparent flame. Whoosh! The flaming humanoid only exhaled a breath, but a terrifying stream of flames that stretched for hundreds of miles appeared in the plain for no reason. Wherever the colorless and transparent stream of flames passed, everything would burn. Plants, animals, trees, rivers, soil, rocks, and even the air started to burn ferociously. The entire world immediately became a burning sea. In the midst of such terrifying flames, all of the mid- and low-level sorcerers, wizard beasts, and puppets hid in the wizard's pagoda, not daring to step out of the elemental barrier. Those who escaped a little too late would immediately explode when they came into contact with the colorless and transparent flames. They screamed in pain and were burned into charcoal, then turned into flying ashes. This was the case for the wizard beasts, and even the puppets made of magical alloys were the same. Wherever the terrifying stream of flames passed, dark spots were branded on the charred ground, leaving behind a pool of charred and deformed metal residue. In the sky above the Ink Abyss Valley, Domnor, Onley, Savorius, and Thuna stood side by side, looking down at the flaming figure that was trying its best to enter the sorcerer world. The surface of Grimm's 1,000-meter-tall body rippled with a layer of red light, absorbing all of the strange flames that blew on his body. Savorius looked at the enemy in fear, his voice hoarse and out of shape. "This doesn't look like Dilma's. Dilma's is a three-headed hound, and this is a fire clone of a god. Of course they can't be the same person." Domnor turned his head and glanced at Grimm, who was as tall as a god, and said coldly, "Lord Grimm, why did Dilma's become Sanai's fire clone? Don't you have anything to say?" Thuna's expression did not change, but there was a hint of a mocking expression in her eyes. Meanwhile, the young Onley's eyes darted back and forth between Grimm and Sanai's clone, looking hesitant and indecisive. As for Gria, she had a serious expression, looking at Grimm with a hint of anger in her eyes. "What is there to say? Since he wants to enter the sorcerer world, he's our enemy. Do we have to separate ourselves?" Grimm said in a low voice, as if this was a matter of course. Domnor was infuriated. As if sensing the aura of the divine fire orb in Grimm's body, the tall figure that was still struggling to pass through suddenly raised its head and roared angrily. "Hand over the divine fire orb, Magus, or I'll turn your territory into scorched earth." The voice was like muffled thunder, reverberating in the sky. Grimm sneered, "If you want to take back the divine fire bead, you better come in first." With that, he condensed a flaming spear without hesitation and threw it fiercely at the figure. The flaming spear was translucent, having been condensed into a solid flame crystal by the powerful flames. It had both fire and physical damage. However, before the flaming spear could even get close to the figure, it was crushed into scattered flames by the red threads that came out of the figure's body. Without Grimm's control, the flames would not be able to harm the clone at all, and would instead become a form of energy replenishment. Renai's clone's control over the laws of fire was stronger than Grimm's, so how could she be harmed by his flames? Seeing that his fire attacks were ineffective, Grimm opened his hand, and the Book of Darkness appeared in his palm in the form of an energy projection. As the pages flipped rapidly, dark green venom streaked through the air and pounced at Renai's clone. Renai's clone was stuck in the plane crack and could not dodge at all. She struggled with all her might while raising her head, two golden flames floating in her eyes, shooting out beams of golden light. The venom was quickly evaporated by the high temperature of the flames, losing its threat to Renai's clone. Without the boost of the laws of poison, normal poison spells would not even have the chance to get close to Renai's clone, let alone cause any damage. Seeing that his enemy was so difficult to deal with, Grimm could only reach into his robes and take out a small and exquisite water soul jade. As the energy within was activated, 100-meter-tall water giant appeared on the battlefield, roaring soundlessly as it transformed into a dark green wave that crashed towards Renai's clone. Faced with the raging wave, Renai's clone opened her mouth and inhaled, swallowing it whole like a whale swallowing water. Burp. Renai's clone let loose a loud burp, and a hint of green flashed across her crimson face as she exhaled a puff of hot steam from her nose and mouth. The wave that contained the full power of a mid-grade 4 water giant was digested just like that. At that moment, the water soul jade in Grimm's palm suddenly cracked into several pieces, turning into a crystalline ball of water spirit that disappeared into the air. The water soul jade that could only be used 3 times had finally been used up. Grimm frowned when he saw that Renai's clone was unscathed and seemingly unharmed. It couldn't be helped. She was a powerhouse of the fire element, and her control over flames and usage of laws was far more natural than his. This meant that most of Grimm's flames were useless against Renai's clone. Even if he managed to cast them, there was a high chance that they would be nullified. This was perhaps the biggest headache for a small fire against a large fire. In the fire elemental plane, fire creatures did not rely on fire spells to fight each other. Instead, they relied on close-quarters combat. The reason for this was because their fire resistance was too high. Using fire spells wasn't as effective as directly pouncing on the other side and punching them. And now, Grimm was facing a similar problem. Grimm chuckled coldly. What? You're just going to watch silently? Don't forget, if it comes in, none of us will have a good time. If you really push me too far, I'll just leave and you'll be the ones to clean up the mess. Hearing Grimm's threat, the experts of the association turned ashen, looking as if they wanted to fight him to the death. Only Domner, who was obviously shrewd, sighed and said, Lord Grimm is right. That is indeed the case. Let's not just watch, let's attack together. In any case, we can't let Renai's clone barge in. With that, Domner turned around and flew back to the wizard's pagoda. Henry, Gloria, and Savorius glanced at each other. They could only pinch their noses and cast spells at Renai's clone, who couldn't dodge in time. Chapter 1426. You ants, don't even think of resisting the power of God. Get out of my way. Renai's clone tore open a crack in the plane with great difficulty. She had to resist the terrifying repulsive force of the sorcerer world, as well as fend off the frenzied attacks of the super beings present. The tall figure of fire raised its head, revealing a furious and tyrannical expression as it roared. Unfortunately, its body was stuck in a crack in the plane's barrier, and the power it could use was limited. Facing the increasingly ferocious attacks from within the plane, the tall figure of fire could only take a beating without being able to retaliate. Every time the spells that rained down on its body landed on the red light, it would shake violently. This made Renai's clone even more furious. Get out of my way, the series of attacks enraged Renai's clone. She barely managed to squeeze into a head and right arm, raising her flaming hand to form a sea of fire that soared into the sky, engulfing the super beings present. The attack of a rank 6 fire god's clone was extremely terrifying. The sea of fire covered an area of 10,000 meters, the intensity of the flames reaching 100,000 degrees. It was uniform, with no boundaries between the core and the edges. This attack alone was enough to destroy any being in the plane. With the appearance of the sea of fire, the super beings present were in danger of being wiped out. Grimm had already elementalized his body, and the flames would never be able to harm him again. That was why he was the only one who stood silently in the middle of the sea of fire, completely unharmed. Looking at his companions who were struggling in the sea of fire, Grimm raised his hand and cast a flaming halo that enveloped their bodies. Relying on the immunity to fire damage brought by this flame halo and the flame resistance of a super powerhouse, Henry and the others barely escaped the crisis of death. Only roared and turned into a cloud of white smoke, darting left and right in the sea of fire as he quickly escaped. By the time he reformed his body at the edge of the sea of fire, his exquisite robes were covered in burn marks. He looked miserable beyond words. However, he was still in one piece. The purple light around Gria's body was pushed to the extreme. It was as dense as an amethyst, firmly protecting her inside. Only then did she quickly escape from the sea of fire. By the time he stood still at the edge of the sea of fire, the purple light had dimmed significantly. Moreover, there were clusters of thumb-sized crimson flames dancing within it. It seemed that the power of the fire rules had invaded the core of the rules. Seeing this scene, Gloria's expression was extremely gloomy, and she almost couldn't restrain herself from cursing. The one who suffered the most was undoubtedly the curse wizard, Savorius. Unlike the others, he didn't have treasures to protect himself. How could he fight against the fire god's avatar, which was 2 levels higher than him, with just his own curse law? Therefore, he screamed as he escaped from the sea of fire. By the time he rushed out, his body was already as black as charcoal. Many parts of his body had already been baked into a pitch-black mucus. He flew, howled, and dripped non-stop. The powerful flame rule power wreaked havoc in his body, and he could only desperately condense the curse rule power to resist it. And the result of this resistance was that his body was melting bit by bit, fading away bit by bit. Someone, save me. Gloria, save me. I can't hold on anymore. After escaping from the sea of fire, Savorius froze in midair, turning his charred head to look for his companions. His face was already scorched black and withered, and his skin had burst open inch by inch, revealing the cooked flesh underneath. Steam drifted out from every crack and hole in his body. Savorius's eyes had already burst open, and the pitch-black blood dried up before it could flow down. He turned his empty eye sockets and sensed Gloria's aura. He immediately stretched out his charred right hand to ask for help. He stretched out half of his right hand, and the fingernails on it exploded and flew away. Pieces of flesh were peeled off inch by inch in the wind like dry charcoal, turning into flying ashes that scattered in the air. In the blink of an eye, Savorius's right hand was stripped of flesh and tendons, leaving only a withered, charcoal skeleton. Even though Gloria looked down on the despicable and ruthless Savorius, she couldn't just watch as he was burned alive in front of her. She let out a shout, and a ball of purple light enveloped the charcoal-like cursing wizard. The appearance of the purple light cut off the secret connection between the flame rule power in Savorius's body and Renai's clone in the distance. The power of the flames was greatly reduced. However, it wasn't that easy to expel a level 6 flame rule power. Savorius, who had escaped death, thanked her hurriedly, and his body quickly disappeared from the battlefield. It seemed that he had used a secret technique to return to his wizard's pagoda, hiding in an alternate dimension and using space force to isolate the damage of the flame rule. With the injuries he had sustained, he wouldn't be able to take a step out of the alternate dimension for the next 10 years. Thuna, the leader of the Witches of Death, was the only one who was relatively calm. As soon as the Sea of Flames appeared, the level 4 zombie dragon Artaeist beneath her started spitting out dense white death energy to protect himself and Thuna. They struggled to rush out of the Sea of Flames. After Thuna rushed out of the Sea of Flames, she wasn't injured in the slightest, but the zombie dragon Artaeist, who had made a great contribution, was heavily injured. Many flames started burning on the surface of his pitch-black dragon body, and he couldn't extinguish them no matter how much death energy he spat out. Renai's clone deserved to be at level 6, and just a slight attack was enough to put the few experts on the battlefield in a life-or-death situation. They all fled for their lives. However, this rash attack also caused Renai's clone to suffer a stronger dimensional repulsive force. Her right shoulder and right arm, which had just drilled into the dimensional crack, were pushed out by the dimensional power, and only half of her head was stuck in the dimensional crack. This made most of her previous efforts go to waste. However, after the severe fright, the powerhouses present were extremely fearful of Renai's clone, and no longer dared to approach her. However, when Renai's clone roared angrily and tore open the dimensional crack once again, the War Wizard Pagoda, which had been brewing for a long time in the distance, joined hands and launched a berserk lightning attack. Lightning bolts that were 2 or 3 meters thick descended from the sky, and they seemed like the god of thunder's destructive divine punishment. They struck Renai's clone that was powerless to resist. Every time the lightning struck down, the fiery head that Renai's avatar had extended inside would be smashed to pieces, causing terrifying streams of fire to spill everywhere. Renai's clone was infuriated, but she couldn't do anything about it. After all, most of her body was stuck in the dimensional crack, and the power she could use was limited. She didn't have the power to counterattack the wizard's attacks. The eyes of the infuriated Renai's clone burned, and two powerful golden rays that contained the law of fire swept across the horizon like lasers. Wherever they passed by, the sky was split apart, and the earth was disintegrated. Rocks, soil, plants, insects, everything was instantly vaporized, and they disappeared without a trace. Even the few experts that were hiding far away retreated in shock, not daring to approach the battlefield. Fortunately, Renai's clone had been pushed out by the dimensional power, and only half of her flaming head could be seen. This caused its attacks to have no accuracy at all. It was just an act of venting its anger after going berserk. Recklessly using divine power of fire made the wizard world's dimensional power even more repulsive. After a moment, even the last half of her head retreated, leaving only the pitch-black, twisted dimensional crack floating beneath the Black Ink Valley. At this moment, the so-called Black Ink Valley had already been completely changed beyond recognition. After the successive battles, and with Renai's clone's unbridled destruction, there was no longer any sign of life within 100 miles of the Black Ink Valley. The whole land was scorched black and cracked, and steam and black smoke rose from the ground. Walking from the edge of the scorched land, the further they went, the worse the environment became. The air was unbreathable, and the air was filled with heat waves and poisonous gases that could corrode flesh and corrode bones. Not even soil could be found on the ground, let alone green plants. All they could see was pitch-black, withered rock. The terrain was bumpy and uneven, and many low-lying areas still had pools of dark red lava. However, even the toughest rocks could hardly survive within a 15-mile radius of the Black Ink Valley. Instead, it was replaced by a chaotic and hazy band of chaotic light. These bands of light weren't ordinary magical radiance, but the laws of the plane that had been forced to manifest after the material of the plane had melted away. The numerous ribbons of light represented numerous chains of laws. They seemed to be in a mess, yet they were interweaved together according to some profound and mysterious laws, and they formed a mysterious, bizarre, and extremely grand and marvelous scene. Countless bloodline-like chains intertwined with each other, making it impossible to see where they came from or where they would go in the end. It was as if they were the branches of the world that grew out of the void plane. Although they were only at the end of the world's system of laws, the magnificent and bizarre scene they presented was still intoxicating. Moreover, those with keen senses could even feel the pulse of the world through these law chains. What was the truth of the world? This was the most realistic scene of the plane. The beings of the plane in the past had been confused by the material of another plane, which was why they couldn't see through the material and illusions of the world's origin. But now, when the surroundings of the plane crack were destroyed and the rules were shaken, the true face of this world that was hidden behind the scenes was finally revealed to everyone. Chapter 14:27. Grimm couldn't help but sigh in relief when he saw Renai's clone vanish from the crack. Even though he'd been the one to lure her here, her terrifying might had far exceeded his imagination. His thoughts were still stuck in the realm of beings on a plane, and he couldn't imagine or deduce what the higher life forms were like. However, his brief contact with Renai's clone had given him an epiphany. Compared to magi, gods had a deeper understanding and control of laws, and were closer to the origin. It was just that the gods had divided the laws into different domains, and they had grouped them into divine domains. To the gods, divine domains were their own laws. The gods placed all their power into their divine domains, using them to condense divinity and convert the power of faith from their worshippers into usable divine force. divine force contained the might of a divine domain, and represented the origin of the world. In this aspect, the path of power for magi of laws and gods was somewhat similar. However, a god's true power was borrowed, rather than accumulated bit by bit. That was why a god's true power would be greatly weakened once they left their divine kingdom and origin plane. It was no wonder that many great magi looked down on the gods, even calling them parasites that lived on the laws of the plane of origin. Their everything was tied to the plane of origin, and if something happened to it, they would not survive either. This was why the world of gods had always prevented any external forces from entering their plane of origin. Magi, on the other hand, were more like imitating the power of laws of the plane of origin. They observed, researched, and comprehended the system of laws of the plane of origin, searching for the power of laws that was most compatible with their own soul. They would then trace back to the origin, slowly probing the operation of laws from the end of the chain of laws. This would allow the power they controlled to get closer to the core of the plane of origin. If the plane of origin was a huge tree, what the Magi grasped at the beginning was just one or two leaves at the end. With the leaves, they would follow the veins of the leaves to the branches, and from the branches to the trunk, the branches, the trunk in the end. The source of power for Magi of laws would always be the gigantic roots hidden deep within the earth. With such a huge root system, even a wizard could only master a small part of it in their lifetime. With the source of life in their hands, law-defying wizards could absorb an endless stream of energy from it and become stronger step by step. Perhaps this was the path that the Magi of laws had chosen for themselves. In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint, the dense aura of laws surrounding him and the AI chip's analysis of Renai's clone allowed Grimm to deduce his future path of advancement. He also had a general understanding of the origins of laws. At his level, external resources and knowledge were only a foundation. What truly determined his future development potential was the height and depth of his thoughts. Idealism in the past on Earth, this might have been a kind of dross. However, in a different world that was filled with magical energy, the spiritual consciousness was superior to the material, becoming a dominant and decisive powerful force. However, just as Grimm was about to follow this train of thought, the dimensional rift floating in the thousands of beautiful ribbons of light suddenly began to rumble, and there was a new change. Renai's clone had just been kicked out of the Magus world. What, did she want to come back? Grimm stared intently and began to quickly gather his energy. Sure enough, a large hole tore open in the planar crack, revealing Sinai's fierce, fiery head once again. However, she wasn't stupid enough to enter by herself. Instead, she opened her mouth wide and spat out a stream of scorching red flames. The high-temperature flames surged into the plane, but they didn't engulf everything like before and destroy all life. Instead, they circled around the rift and gathered into a sea of flames. Once the flames reached a certain level, Renai spat out a golden crystal the size of a fingernail and entered the Magus world. As soon as the golden crystal entered the plane, the flame energy scattered around the crack quickly gathered together, as if it had a backbone. In no time at all, a 10-meter-tall flame giant that looked 70% to 80% similar to Renai's clone crawled up from the ground, slowly scanning the unfamiliar world. Judging from its strength and form, this flame giant seemed to be a powerful pinnacle grade 4 flame creature. Only, the flame energy contained within its body was likely stronger than a Tier 5 flame creature's. Divine Shard of Fire. That golden crystal was a divine shard of fire. Only a divine object like the divine Shard of Fire could serve as a vessel for Renai's clone's consciousness, allowing her to freely control the laws of fire in the plane. Anri, Gloria, and Thuna watched the scene at the same time, their eyes glinting with a cold glint. Their hearts couldn't help but pound wildly. Divine shards were naturally the foundation of power that gods relied on to survive. Only by gathering enough quintessence would they be able to ascend to a higher level of god. If the crystal of law that Grimm had previously obtained was just a fragment of some kind of law power, then the divinity contained the essence of a complete power system. Although it had been broken into finger-sized fragments, as long as it was still a divine shard, the power within would always be complete and refined. Once a magus obtained a divine shard like this, its effects would be akin to turning stone into gold. It might not be possible to turn a mortal into a god with such a small shard, but it would be no problem for a pinnacle grade 4 magus who was on the verge of breaking through to grade 5. However, considering the origin of the divine shard, Grimm was the only magus present who could make use of it. The moment the divine shard appeared, the hearts of the powerhouses trembled for some reason. They faintly felt that this was what Grimm had been trying to achieve all this time. Did he want to steal Renai's divine shard? Did he have the strength to fight against such a terrifying clone of the fire god? Was he trying to borrow our power again? As these thoughts flashed through everyone's minds, the 1,000-meter-tall Grimm finally made his move. In a burst of earth-shattering laughter, Grimm's huge body abruptly collapsed, reverting to a pure and refined flame energy. It turned into a terrifying stream of flames that rushed towards the flame giant who had just condensed his body. Still bound by the laws of the plane, the flaming projection had nowhere to hide. It simply opened its mouth wide and swallowed the oncoming flames. Just like how Renai's flames could not harm Grimm's body, Grimm's flames could not harm the flaming projection either. As long as it was given enough time, it could even devour 10 Grimm Imus. After all, the flaming projection had a shard of divine shard that could refine and convert any type of fire energy. However, it was not so easy to devour the flames that contained Grimm's willpower in an instant. One had to know that Grimm's current level of power was not any weaker than Renai's clone. It was just that his energy reserves and control of flames were far superior. The flame projection could not help but feel puzzled by Grimm's strange behavior that was akin to sending himself to his death. However, it would be a waste if it did not accept power that was delivered to its doorstep. It instinctively devoured Grimm's boundless flames. Suddenly, the flame energy in his body that contained Grimm's willpower began to riot. The flaming projection laughed coldly, using its own power to suppress it. Its strength was more than 10 times that of Grimm's, and it was not worried that this little bit of fire would cause a ruckus in its stomach. However, the restlessness in its body had undoubtedly scattered its power, causing it to temporarily lose control of its body. Just as it was delightedly trying to suppress Grimm's willpower, the flaming projection suddenly sensed something. It used all its strength to turn around. Behind it, a pair of huge dark green eyes were staring at it. When she saw the flame projection turn around, her dark green eyes flashed with a hint of mockery. She then opened her mouth wide, revealing fangs that were even larger and deeper than Renai's clone, and swallowed it with a roar. Devouring demon fish. It was Grimm's astral beast transformation ability that he had recently learned. After transforming into a devouring demon fish, Grimm instantly gained the ability to devour a body's strength that was no more than 2 times his own. However, it was obvious that the flaming projection that Grimm had devoured today was more than 10 times his own strength. Hence, after a bout of nausea, Grimm opened his mouth and spat out more than half of his flaming body from his stomach. Only then did he turn around and tear through space, vanishing without a trace. Without the shard of divinity and Renai's divine soul's control, the remaining half of his flaming body immediately dissipated into a boundless sea of flames that spread in all directions. The surroundings of Black Ink Valley, which had just stabilized, were heavily damaged by the flames once more. Renai's clone, who had been silently standing outside the plane rift and controlling the flaming projection with the shard of divinity, suddenly let out an earth-shattering roar of fury. Just now, that hateful human magus had actually turned into a strange astral beast and devoured half of her flaming projection. What infuriated her the most was that the shard of divinity had been snatched away as well. Having lost the connection to the shard of divinity, Renai's clone's aura immediately plummeted, her strength dropping by a few ranks. Just as she was about to charge into the sorcerer world and fight to the death with the human sorcerer, Sanai's avatar suddenly stiffened and slowly turned around. In the depths of the stars, the three-headed hellhound Dilmas was walking towards her step by step. The 6 huge eyes on its 3 heads revealed a hint of burning greed and evilness as they stared at its body. Both of them were at grade 6, although Renai's clone was more powerful. However, as a lord of disaster, Dilmas seemed to be more adept at fighting and killing. When these two people came together, who would win and who would lose, who would live and who would die, was still unknown. Chapter 1428. The Blazing Flame Monarch. In the Wizard Pagoda's most tightly guarded secret wizard room, the space was suddenly torn apart, and a giant star beast in the shape of a demonic fish slid out, tumbling onto the cold, hard floor. This was a fish-shaped star beast with a strange body shape. From head to tail, from top to bottom, this fish-shaped star beast resembled a fat-headed fish. It was 10 meters long and 5 meters tall. Its entire body was composed of a head and a tail, and it was almost impossible to see the middle part of the body that was connected. At this moment, the demonic fish seemed to have swallowed an entire sun. Countless rays of light and heat shot out from the huge fanged mouth that occupied nearly half of the space on the fat fish's head, turning the secret chamber into a huge oven. The demonic fish struggled crazily, its innards about to be cooked by the sun. Even so, the demonic fish clenched its teeth and held on, refusing to let the rampaging sun rush out of its stomach. At the same time, it quickly mobilized the Wizard Pagoda's power, drawing over clear and pure elemental water from another world's water elemental plane. The demonic fish took advantage of the situation and started swallowing the elemental water, trying to extinguish the struggling, burning sun. Water and fire clashed and intertwined in its stomach, triggering an elemental riot that made the demonic fish hover between life and death in pain. However, no matter how painful and torturous it was, the demonic fish Grim wouldn't loosen its mouth. It wouldn't spit out the divinity fragment that contained Renai's will. The devouring demonic fish's special constitution and race abilities were activated at full force, quickly wearing down the berserk flame will. Thump, 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 muffled banging and slapping sounds reverberated in the empty wizard tower, causing the whole tower to shake and tremble violently. The fight between Grim and Renai's remnant will cause the blazing flame monarch's surroundings to sink into an abyss of suffering. The once blazing cavern began to collapse one after another amidst the tremors. Waves of scorching hot magma rushed out of the surface, rising up to 100 meters before it ran out of power and began to sprinkle down. The magical creatures, beasts, and birds that had been living peacefully around the blazing cavern seemed to have sensed the arrival of doomsday. They frantically rushed out of their nests and fled into the distance. Soon, streams of crimson lava gushed out of the cracks on the ground and overturned the forest and land within a radius of nearly 10 miles, turning into waves of lava that quickly spread further away. The wild beasts and ferocious birds that could not escape in time were instantly engulfed by the falling lava fireballs. Finally, after a series of earth-shattering explosions and rumbles, the ground around the flame cave suddenly sank by more than 10 meters, forming a huge depression. Crimson lava and rolling, viscous magma surged up from the ground and quickly filled the basin, turning it into a huge lava lake with scorching heat waves that no living creature dared to approach. The blazing flame monarch no longer existed. Grim swallowed the flame projection's head in one gulp and fled, leaving the Mage Association with a terrifying mess to deal with. Black Ink Valley was completely destroyed. It had completely lost control of itself and could not be restored. After all, the one fighting just now was a flame projection that the powerful god of fire Renai had forced into the Magus world. Her strength was at the peak of rank 4, but the energy stored in her body was enough to look down on rank 5 beings. With such a powerful body, she would not be at a disadvantage even if she were surrounded by a dozen powerful beings. She could even rely on her control of the laws of fire and her understanding of power to stand above everyone else. This was also why Renai had dared to grit her teeth and charge into the Magus world despite knowing that it was surrounded by wolves. If Magi were a pack of wolves, then Renai was a ferocious tiger. Even with most of her strength restricted in the cage, her savage nature and experience of slaughter were still present. Her attitude and aura were different from the wild wolves. However, she did not expect that the legendary fire magus she was facing was also an extraordinary person. Grim was only a rank 4 magus according to the Magi's hierarchy. However, the power of laws and the power of his bloodline allowed him to control the laws of fire of the eternal flame. With this trump card, he would be the equivalent of a Tier 4 sorcerer with a hack. While other Magi were still using low-level elemental, energy, and laws, he was already firing with a rocket launcher. The clash between these two beings that exceeded the limits of the plane had only lasted for a split second, but it was a devastating blow to the world. What was even more terrifying was that this attack had reached the level of the laws, causing the laws of the plane and the laws of the world to become unrecognizable, and they were thrown into a complete mess. The entire Black Ink Valley no longer existed, it had completely turned into a void plane. Any material from the plane that entered this place would be ground into powder that was difficult to be seen by the naked eye by the chaotic energy storm. Even the chain of laws would break inch by inch in this place, unable to stabilize the plane. The black scar suspended in the middle of the energy storm and the chaotic laws of the plane. From time to time, energy hurricanes spewed out from it, making the surroundings even more chaotic and dangerous. At the edge of the energy storm, under the erosion of magic energy, the exposed continent began to peel off layer by layer and disintegrate. Everything that was sucked into the storm instantly disintegrated into the most primitive particles, disappearing without a trace. With such a breach, the Magus world would probably lose tons of basic substances every day. The Magus world's consciousness was extremely furious at the continuous loss of blood. It constantly urged the chains of laws to extend into the energy storm, repairing the broken laws and the chaotic laws of the plane bit by bit. However, facing the terrifying after-effects of the battle between two supreme beings, even with the strength of the plane's consciousness, it would still take several hundred years to completely repair this place. The existence of such a thing in the Magus Association's territory was undoubtedly an unstable factor. The continuous attacks and destruction had caused the plane's barrier to become unprecedentedly weak. The plane crack was now large enough for peak rank 4 otherworld beings to barge in at any time. Fighting here, without the protection and support of the plane's consciousness, even the most powerful Magi would have to bear a huge risk. After all, without the plane's suppression and support, human Magi were far too weak compared to astral beasts, calamity beings, and abyssal demons. However, no matter how dangerous it was, the Magus Association could only pinch their noses and go fill the hole. Who asked this plane crack to be in their territory? If a big fellow came out, the Association's territory would be the first to suffer. Fortunately, after the Association sent out powerful beings to investigate, they found that the enemies guarding outside the plane crack had disappeared. In this way, it provided a relatively safe environment for the Wizard Association to fill in the holes and loopholes. A large number of Association Magi put up protective barriers and withstood the assault of the energy storm. They were like a group of diligent ants at the edge of the plane crack. They set up sealing spell formations to stop the void hurricanes from entering, then purify the environment inside the crack, trying their best to calm the chaotic elemental energy. These tasks were huge and messy, but they were essential. Only by doing this would the plane's consciousness be able to repair the plane's laws in a more peaceful environment. Otherwise, just as the plane's law chain was being repaired, it would be destroyed by the energy hurricanes that blew in from the outside. Then, the traces of war in this plain, which was almost like a wasteland, could not be repaired even after 1,000 years. From this, one could see why the plane's consciousness had such a strong will to expel all the supreme beings from the plane. It was for no other reason than the terrifying damage their every move caused to this plane. If they were allowed to wantonly squander their power, the entire plane might collapse into the most primitive form of energy. When that happened, the Magus world would lose the basic function of nurturing life and carrying on the legacy of the Magus civilization. It was precisely because the great sorcerers of the past understood this that they willingly left the sorcerer's world and went to outer space in search of a place where they could entrust their power. The disaster creatures were beaten back, Renai's flame projection was killed by Grimm, and Renai's clone was nowhere to be found. At this point, the battle had come to an end. The Silver Alliance bid the Northern Witches a simple farewell, and one by one, they returned to their territories. Having lost their leader, the 6 Central Rank 4 witches fled back to the Central Continent under the cold gazes of the Association's Magi. There was no helping it. Everyone had seen the battle clearly. The Magus Association had been tricked by Grimm, using the Association's power to kill Renai's flame projection. This legendary fire wizard was the reason why the former Black Ink Valley had become such a perilous place in the current plane. It could be imagined that if the Sorcerer Association did not want that plane of danger to continue to expand, they could only continue to invest resources and manpower to repair it. In order to prevent new enemies from entering the plane crack, they had to have a peak rank 4 super powerhouse stationed there all year round. The entry and exit of the Sorcerer Association had been completely screwed over. In the past, with Domner, Anri, and Gria's ferocity, they would definitely have used their full strength to kill the 6 Central Rank 4 witches, causing the Central Continent to lose a lot of blood. However, Grimm had already fled back to the Central Continent. If the Magus Association did that, it would be a complete fallout with him. If such a powerful Magus caused a ruckus, even the plane's consciousness would have a headache, let alone the ants of the Magus Association. After taking away the flame projection's shard of divinity, no one could predict how strong this legendary fire Magus would become. Hence, for the sake of the long term and safety, the Magus Association could only watch Clara and the others leave. Chapter 1429. The first wave of the mana wave had finally ended. When Clara and the others returned to the Central Continent through the teleportation formation, the entire region was shaken. While Grimm had the title of a legendary fire wizard, he had never fought against the other organizations head-on. Hence, no one knew how powerful his title was. During this trip to the Sorcerer Association, several major forces had come out to show their faces. In comparison, the Central Continent had the powerful Magus Grimm, and could be compared to the 3 major organizations in every aspect. Not only did this deeply inspire the Magi of the Central Continent, the Grade 4 Magi were also honored for the first time. 8 had left, but 6 had returned. Elisa had unfortunately died in battle, and Grimm's whereabouts were a mystery. However, the prestige and aura of the Central Continent had been lifted. Everywhere was filled with a sense of joy, as if the Central Continent was about to prosper. It was said that Grimm had fought a flame projection of the fire god Renai, and then disappeared. Mary, who had been guarding the spatial crack, hurried back to the blazing flame monarch. By the time they arrived, the monarch had been razed to the ground by a mysterious force. Even the blazing cavern had collapsed into a lava lake that spanned 5 to 6 kilometers. It wasn't just the blazing cavern. Even the dark forest, which had once been filled with life, had turned into a scorched land. Within their line of sight, there were seething heat waves and thick black pillars of smoke. Mary was perched high on the bow of the flagship, the Visero, leaning over to look at everything. Her brows were tightly furrowed, and her pretty face was deathly pale. She was caught unprepared by the abnormalities. Behind her, The dozen or so scarlet magi were also watching. All of them were silent, looking deeply worried. "Are you sure Grimm returned here?" Mary suddenly asked coldly. Amelia took a step forward and calmly analyzed the situation. According to Clara and the others, the master left the battlefield alone 3 days ago. The abnormalities here happened 3 days ago as well. I've asked the Magi on duty at Songta City. When the blazing flame monarch was in trouble, they sent people to investigate underground, but they were forced out by the fiery aura. It seems. Seems like what? The intensity of the underground flames seems to be over 1,000 degrees. Even a rank 3 magus wouldn't be able to see through the lava lake. When everyone heard this, they were all shocked. Just the intensity of the flames on the periphery had already reached 1,000 degrees. Just what level had the blazing flame monarch reached? Could the Master's Wizard's pagoda have already been engulfed by the earth fire? The blazing flame monarch was the wizard's pagoda that belonged to the leader of the family. Out of all the scarlet wizards present, only Mary could enter and leave freely. However, now that something had happened to the blazing flame monarch, something seemed to have happened to the teleportation formation inside as well. As such, these Crimson family members had actually lost direct contact with Grimm. "No, I have to find out what's going on with Grimm. All of you stay here, I'll go down and take a look myself." With that, Mary flapped her wings and prepared to dive down. At this moment, a clear and sweet female voice suddenly sounded from behind. "Sister Mary, wait!" Mary's delicate body froze in midair before she slowly turned around. 3 magi walked out of the cabin of the Viscera warship, one in front and one behind. Seeing the young and beautiful magus in front of them, many of the scarlet wizards present hurriedly bowed in greeting. "Greetings, Lady Alice." It was the leader of the Witches of Destiny, Alice, who had left the Magus world some time ago. Behind her were the Ice Witch Chave and the Violent Witch Sophia. "I think we've agreed before that whoever's more powerful will be the big sister. Why, are you sure you can defeat me now?" For some reason, Mary could never calm down when she saw Alice. She flapped her wings and slowly flew back to the deck, looking at Alice with a gaze full of coercion. "Grimm's whereabouts are unknown. Are you going to challenge me now?" Alice smiled sweetly, her expression relaxed. However, behind her, Chave and Sophia looked at Mary with unfriendly gazes. Mary rolled her eyes and then started giggling. The Violent Witch Sophia, who had a bad temper, hugged her thick wooden rod and said coldly, "What are you laughing at? Your man is about to die, and you can still laugh?" Mary immediately laughed even more heartily. She gasped for breath and said, "You scolded me well. Don't forget, my man is also your leader's man. If you really curse Grimm to death, Alice will kill you." Alice's face immediately turned red when she heard that, and she glanced at Sophia in annoyance. She then calmed herself down and said solemnly, "Mary, you can't go down there. None of us here can." "What's wrong? Is Grimm really down there?" Mary flew in front of Alice. She finally stopped smiling and asked anxiously, "Yes, he's down there." Alice nodded. "Before coming here, I did a divination for him. He's still safe, and there's no danger to his life. Although there's a small risk, everything will turn for the better." "Then why didn't he come out to meet us?" Mary asked. "You know about his situation. He's already half a step into level 5, but due to his lack of mental strength, he forcefully delayed his advancement. He seems to have gained something from this trip to the association, and has been forced into hibernation. This hibernation will last for a long time, and when he comes out, he'll probably be a level 5 magus." For some reason, when Grimm's advancement was mentioned, there was not a hint of joy on Alice's face. Hearing this, Mary's expression was mixed with joy and worry, as if she had thought of something difficult to decide on. The higher-ups of the Crimson family did not have such concerns, and all the Magi's faces were brimming with admiration and envy. Their master's pace was getting faster and faster, to the point where they could no longer keep up with him. Every time they thought of this, their expressions would become complicated, and they would sigh inwardly. However, they were also sincerely happy for their master. The Crimson family was finally going to have a great magus. To the Crimson Magi, Grimm's advancement to level 5 was a great honor for the family. However, to Alice and Mary, this also meant that they would have to temporarily separate from Grimm. In the past, they had been busy with their own things, and had not had much free time to gather together. However, they were in the same world, and could see each other at any time, so they did not have to worry about each other. However, if Grimm really advanced to level 5, it would be time for him to leave for the outer regions. At that time, it would not be as easy for them to see him again. If the two girls were unable to keep up with Grimm's pace, they would only be left further and further behind. When that time came, they would only be able to hide in the dark and silently admire his glory, and would not be able to get close to him. Thinking of this, the previous grudge between the two women vanished into thin air. Now that she had Alice's guarantee, Mary did not persist in investigating further. The two girls gathered together for a simple discussion, and immediately issued a series of orders. With this lava lake as the center, the area within a 50-kilometer radius was designated as the Central Forbidden Zone, and no Magi other than the Crimson family were allowed to enter. In order to ensure that Grimm would not be disturbed, a giant airship would be stationed in the lava lake area, and high-ranked Magi from the family would be stationed there in turns. Alice and Mary would go to various places and begin to consolidate the Magi forces in the central region. Unexpectedly, although Grimm did not show up, none of the Grade 4 Magi in the central region showed any hostility or resistance. This was especially so for the 6 old fellows who had followed Grimm through the Planar War, and all of them had become admirers of the legendary Fire Magus. Even Matthew and Nicholas, who had always been at odds with the Crimson family, changed their attitudes and became even more enthusiastic about the consolidation of the Central Region's forces. In the end, all the Grade 4 Magi in the Central Region agreed to form the Horton Academy to consolidate the forces of the large families, forming the 4th largest Magus organization in the Magus world. Moreover, this Horton Academy was an open organization, and did not restrict the identity of the people who wanted to join. If that was the case, many Magi and acolytes in the territories of the 3 major organizations would be eager to join them. However, it wasn't easy to organize such a grand event in one go. Regarding the Horton Academy's faculties, the division of subjects, the appointment of professors, the deployment of personnel, the construction of resource points, the establishment of laboratories, the distribution of internal benefits. Too many trivial matters were all placed on the heads of Mary, Alice, and the group of Crimson Sorcerers. The Central Region used to be known as the Scattered Forest of Towers, which meant that each of the large families had their own interests and ways of ruling their families. Now, they needed to give up a portion of their family's territory, Wizard's Pagoda, and resource points, and then take care of their family's interests within the organization. Such a small yet intricate negotiation was not something that could be concluded in just 1 or 2 rounds. All of the higher-ups of the Crimson family shuttled back and forth between the various large Grade 4 factions, negotiating, compromising, and doing behind-the-scenes deals. Everyone was extremely busy, working their hearts out for the establishment of the 4th largest organization. Finally, after 5 years of preparation, the negotiations between all the Grade 4 factions came to an end. The Crimson family began to announce to the 3 large Magus organizations that the Horton Academy in the central region of the continent would officially become the 4th largest Magus organization in the Magus world. Chapter 1430. Sorcerer Calendar, Year 33072, 5th of November. This was a great day worthy of a special mention. On this day, the 4th large-scale sorcerer organization in the sorcerer world was successfully born in the central continent. It was called the Horton Sorcerer Academy. The Horton Sorcerer Academy was located near the Iron Forest City in the Alovis region of the Crimson family. The territory that belonged to the academy was only about 1/5 the size of the Alovis region. It was a public academy that was open to the public. Now, with the influx of all the Grade 4 organizations in the Central Continent, the Horton Sorcerer Academy had become a large-scale public academy. Its territory covered more than 70% of the 31 regions in the Central Continent. The influx of high-grade and low-grade sorcerers gave the Horton Sorcerer Academy an unprecedented number of teachers. It was enough to surpass the Northern Lands and the Silver Alliance to become the second most powerful sorcerer organization in the entire sorcerer world. Of course, every reputable sorcerer organization would need a powerful sorcerer to act as the core of their soul in order to unite the high-grade sorcerers. Only when the higher-ups of these organizations worked together could the entire sorcerer organization be united and become a powerful organization that could threaten the outside world and the inside world. The soul of the newly established Horton Sorcerer Academy was the legendary Fire Sorcerer Grimm. It could be said that the legendary Fire Sorcerer Grimm's power far surpassed that of his peers. He had broken the Central Continent's previous state of disunity, swept away the regional barriers, and subdued all the Grade 4 organizations in the Central Continent. It was difficult to find someone who could compare to such a great achievement even if one flipped through all the books on sorcery. If one were to go back in time, perhaps only the 3 powerful sorcerers who founded the 3 great sorcerer organizations in the ancient times could compare to him. Those 3 powerful sorcerers all became great beings as high as Grade 9, and they were the most respected leaders and pioneers in the entire sorcerer civilization. Hence, in private discussions, many magi were secretly speculating whether this legendary fire magus Grimm would one day become such a powerful and mighty top-notch magus. In particular, many people learned that the reason why the legendary fire wizard was absent from the establishment and expansion ceremony of the Horton Witchcraft Academy was because he had already embarked on the path of evolution to level 5. Perhaps the next time that legendary fire wizard appeared would be when he became a great wizard. This also meant that the newly established Horton Sorcerer Academy had the full support of a future great sorcerer. A rank 5 great sorcerer who was temporarily staying in the sorcerer world. To be honest, there was nothing more important than this. The reason why the 3 major wizard organizations did not come forward to stop the establishment of the Horton Academy of Witchcraft and even sent people to attend the founding ceremony of the organization was that the 3 major wizard organizations did not come forward to stop the establishment of the Horton Academy. Perhaps this was the most crucial factor. Iron Forest City. Horton Witchcraft Academy Headquarters. Ever since the beginning of November, Iron Forest City had become a sea of celebration, filled with singing and dancing. The expansion of the Horton Sorcerer Academy once again made Iron Forest City a world-famous holy land for sorcerers. In this place, wizards sat on the mounts of wizard beasts and goblins that were galloping on the ground. Wizards sat on the ferocious birds and beasts that were soaring in the sky. Even at the ends of the streets, there were still magi walking hurriedly, their faces full of joy. This place had become the world of sorcerers. Every corner and every inch of space was filled with sorcerers. The attendants and waiters here were a large number of acolytes from all over the world. The Horton Witchcraft Academy headquarters was so large that it exceeded the scope of ordinary sorcerer organizations. It occupied almost every inch of land within 100 miles of Iron Forest City. Numerous witchcraft halls, libraries, alchemy laboratories, magic equipment factories, witchcraft training grounds, and other witchcraft buildings rose from the ground, scattered around Iron Forest City in a picturesque manner. The acolytes who came from other places to familiarize themselves with the various witchcraft facilities would probably have to spend months or even half a year just to familiarize themselves with the various witchcraft facilities within the academy. If they wanted to go to any witchcraft building, they would have to equip themselves with a goblin chocobo or a goblin sports car. Otherwise, they would have to spend more than half of their time traveling between the library and the laboratory. After the Horton Witchcraft Academy's extensive remodeling, Iron Forest City had become a capital of magic equipment. Magic pools, magic equipment rentals, and magic equipment factories could be seen everywhere. All of these made the convenience and wonder of magic equipment a daily occurrence. However, due to the sheer number of sorcerers, the radiation of witchcraft energy could still cause irreversible damage to normal people, despite being filtered by purification spell formations. Therefore, those who could step within 100 miles of Iron Forest City had to be at least an acolyte. Of course, as the Horton Witchcraft Academy's fame spread far and wide, the 127 secondary planes that belonged to the Academy also selected some of the more outstanding intelligent creatures and races to enter the Academy to study. As a result, a large group of foreign students with strange appearances, customs, and races suddenly appeared in Iron Forest City. In order to control the number of foreign students in the Academy, the Horton Witchcraft Academy set a limit of 5 foreign students per secondary plane every 10 years, and they could not be older than 30, with the exception of special races. Therefore, humans in the sorcerer world who possessed elemental talent could be selected as acolytes and enter the outer organizations of the Academy. However, the foreign students of the Academy did not enjoy such benefit. Almost all of them were geniuses of the younger generation in their respective planes. Moreover, within their planes, if one wanted to obtain the qualifications to study in the sorcerer world's main plane, they would have to go through many bloody eliminations and battles. There were geniuses every year, but the quotas were always so few. Moreover, the secondary planes also had their own hierarchy of nobles, who didn't want to send their closest ones to the main plane to receive the highest level of education and training in sorcerer world. After all, any foreign student who was successful in their studies could easily become a member of the ruling class after returning to their plane with the connections they had built during their apprenticeship, even if they could not become a sorcerer. This kind of gilding was undoubtedly the most convenient way for the nobles to get close to the sorcerers. Therefore, the foreign students who were able to go through bloody battles and eliminations and stand out from the thousands of troops were all people with extraordinary skills. The only reason why they were unknown before was because they lacked opportunities. Now, the Horton Witchcraft Academy had given them this opportunity. The Academy's higher-ups treated all students equally without any discrimination or bias. As long as they could earn enough points and complete specific Academy missions, the Academy would provide them with a certain amount of resources to groom them as sorcerers. As for whether they could succeed, it would depend on their own luck and abilities. It was precisely because of this impartial style of doing things and the almost terrifying amount of sorcerer resources that the Horton Witchcraft Academy had quickly nurtured its first batch of official sorcerers with a strong academy style in the 5 years it had been set up and running. Among them, there was no lack of foreign students who had successfully advanced to become sorcerers and become a member of the sorcerer system. Today, the 5th of November, was the day that the Horton Witchcraft Academy was officially established. It had also become a great day of celebration for the sorcerers and apprentices living in the Iron Forest City's Academy District for the past 5 years. Iron Forest City. Within the Academy's tall wizard's pagoda in the Central District, Mary was wearing an exquisite and gorgeous wizard robe, quietly standing at the highest level of the wizard's pagoda. She looked down calmly at the orderly streets below her, which were like a chessboard, and at the crowd squirming like ants through the closed windows. Behind her, 4 young and beautiful elven maidservants were carefully helping her put on those complicated witchcraft accessories. Each of the magic ornaments was overflowing with a faint magic halo. After they were placed on Mary's robe, they would resonate with the runes on the robe, creating a dazzling effect. Ever since Mary had fused with the Nightmare Castle, her abilities had also improved by leaps and bounds. Hence, even though the elf maids were just by her side, they could still sense the wisps of wizard energy radiation that were as sharp as needles. What was even more terrifying was that the law of blood and nightmare aura that Mary controlled were both extremely invasive. If they stayed by her side for more than a quarter of an hour, they would suffer from blood loss and nightmares. Thus, only female elves with level 2 abilities could stay by Mary's side to serve her. As Mary looked down at the Iron Forest city, deep in thought, Amelia, who had already reached the middle stage of level 3, was holding a long document in her hands. She softly reported the various arrangements for the ceremony. The representative from the Silver Alliance is Vice Chairman Meloni. Attendance, gift. Arrangements have been made for them to stay in Hall Number 7. Lord Alfred and S.A. will be in charge of receiving them. The representative from the north is the leader of the Deceit Witches, Angelina. Attendance, gift. Arrangements have been made for them to stay in Hall Number 9. Lord Clara and Leia will be in charge of receiving them. Mary asked without turning her head as she listened quietly. What about the Magus Association? We haven't received any news yet. At this moment, there was less than an hour before the ceremony began, but there was still no news from the Magus Association. This was clearly a clear indication of their attitude. Mary snorted coldly and kept her mouth shut. Amelia raised her head and took a peek. She could only continue reporting. The Merfolk, the Underground World, and the Storm Kingdom have also sent representatives to attend the ceremony. I've already assigned people to receive them. The preparations for the ceremony have been completed. When the time comes, we will need Lady Mary to personally host the ceremony. The general process of the ceremony is as follows. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.